could please come to order. This is a joint subcommittee, a subcommittee on Social Security and a subcommittee on Income Security and Family Support hearing this morning to talk about the backlog that all Americans know about with regard to Social Security disability claims, as well as looking at the ability from the resource standpoint to reevaluate people who have been on disability and who may have improved to the point where their case needs to be reevaluated. Mr. Johnson, who is a ranking member on the Social Security Subcommittee, is going to be arriving soon. He has been in Texas, I understand. He's coming back. So we welcome Mr. Linder. I will try to keep my opening statement short, and I would hope that the other members could see their way clear to do as well. We'll be talking about a lot of numbers today. But you know that behind the numbers are real people with real problems out there across the country who are waiting sometimes over a year. In my case in Tennessee, it's average waiting time in Memphis is 16 months. In Nashville, it's a little more than that, 18 months. And all of us have anecdotal experiences with constituents who have been waiting to the point that many of them have died actually while waiting on an evaluation of their claim. And so as we go through these numbers, I think it would be wise for us to keep in mind that there are real people out there that are in need, and so we will look at all of those questions that I've outlined. So at this time, I would ask Mr. Linder if he has any opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today's hearing is really about two things. The first is a large backlog in Social Security and SSI disability claims and efforts to reduce it. That is a big problem which we should work to fix. The second, in the long run, more important thing this hearing is about is the plummeting credibility of our ability to propose solutions for this country. There seems to have been adopted the axiom that anything that is wrong can be fixed by a big government program. We're here today talking about one that is failing, and we expect to vote this year on a government-run health care system that will also fail. I have a suggestion for our guests and viewers. Take the press release announcing today's hearings and substitute the words health care service for Social Security disability wherever they appear. The title of the hearing would be Eliminating the Health Care Service Backlog. The background would discuss how the backlog of claims for health care services has reached unprecedented levels, and focus on the hearing would be on the large backlog in health care services. The reality is the backlogs and ultimately rationing of services plaguing Social Security's disability claim system will be repeated or worse in a government-run health care system. To deny that is to not deny the existence of problems that we will hear about today. Only the backlogs of the future won't just mean people don't get disability checks on time. It'll mean people will die waiting for treatment or after receiving inadequate treatment. I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record an article published last week about one hospital in England where between 400 and 1,200 more people died than would have been expected in a 3-year period at the National Health Service Hospital. This led Prime Minister Gordon Brown to apologize to all those who have suffered from mistakes have been made. Some mistakes, the article notes how visitors saw patients drinking out of flower vases. They were so thirsty. I would like to remind you that about 30 years ago, the British National Health Service approved the use of administrative failure as an acceptable cause of death for a death certificate. Today's hearing is a cautionary tale for those who think a government-run healthcare system will efficiently deliver medical services in a timely fashion. It won't. If the government cannot adequately serve the 2.6 million Americans who annually apply for disability benefits today, what makes us think it will provide adequate health care services to 300 million Americans tomorrow? Those who trust in this Congress to allocate just the right amount of social policy medicine to cure what ails us deserve the poor service they will surely get. largest budget problems that we face as a nation are Social Security and Medicare. Need we create more? Will the same Congress that has, in the unanimous opinion of today's testimony, underfunded Social Security's disability process, be generous with the government health care bureaucracy or its doctors, nurses, and specialist employees? What's the evidence of that? There is none. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Linder. And Mr. Johnson has arrived, so Mr. Johnson, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations. I look forward to the good work we can accomplish together. I also want to welcome our new members, our colleagues from the Income Security and Family Support Committee. We all share a real concern about the delays our constituents face when they visit or contact a local Social Security office, call the 800 number, or wait over 16 months for a decision in their disability appeal before an administrative judge. And Mr. Astrue, I know you've done good work to try to fix that. At the same time, efforts to address program waste, fraud, and abuse have been curtailed, costing billions in improper payments while reducing taxpayer confidence that their hard-earned payroll tax dollars will provide the services they paid for and deserve. This committee has worked on a bipartisan basis to obtain needed funding for the Social Security Administration. In the last 2 years, Congress sent an additional $275 million to the agency above the President's request. In the economic stimulus package, Social Security received an additional $1 billion for a new computer center and to help process the growing number of applications for retirement and disability benefits. Now, the agency, it's time for you guys to step up and account for how the money is going to translate into real results. In the short term, Social Security must answer their phones, reduce the wait times for people in local Social Security offices, and tell people sooner whether their application for Social Security benefits has been granted or denied at all levels in the process. Whether Social Security can get the job done depends in large part on their having state-of-the-art computers driven by the latest proven software. Far from state-of-the-art, Social Security's main computer systems are stuck in the past. Social Security's main database still operates using 1950s technology, including COBOL programming language. Social Security is working to replace this language, but that project is not estimated to be completed until 2014. Last year, we learned the agency's 30-year-old computer center will be unable to carry its load after 2012. We're not so far from there. In the meantime, a second data center has been built in Durham, North Carolina, to run some of the agency's daily work and temporarily step in to keep basic operations running if needed. However, Durham's not going to be fully operational until 2012 and may not be able to cover all the agency's computing needs. At the same time, Social Security now faces a difficult task of purchasing a new computer center using the $500 million they just received. Going forward, Social Security cannot get this wrong. So I would like the Commissioner to tell us his plan for maintaining agency computer operations while finishing the Durham Data Center and building a new computer center. I hope we can solve this problem because we're worried to death about some disaster befalling that building, and the only site that contains Social Security information goes defunct. I thank our witnesses for being here today and look forward to hearing their testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I'd like to now ask Mr. McDermott, Dr. McDermott, who's the Chairman of the Subcommittee on Income Security and Family Support, for his statement. And then,
thank you, Mr. Tanner, for including us in this hearing. There are nearly 6 million disabled individuals who wait for SSI to provide them with a helping hand. This program really serves as a safety net to provide very modest cash assistance and medical coverage through Medicaid programs to those who have little or no income or assets. Now, disability benefits, either through supplemental security income or Social Security programs, serve as a lifeline, really, for a number of people. The cash assistance and health care coverage provided to these individuals gives them the help that makes it possible for them to have the ends meet. Now, many are not in a position to wait months to receive a decision on their eligibility for assistance, particularly those with very limited resources who are seeking assistance through the SSI program. You can imagine the clamor we would have if we had this kind of wait in our unemployment insurance. Yet today, the average waiting time to secure a hearing for a disability claim at SSA is roughly 500 days, 16 and a half months. That is simply unacceptable. There must be a better way to serve the American public. To be fair, the Social Security Administration has operated at an insufficient funding level, as you've heard, for a number of years. The agency did not have the resources it needed to keep pace with the normal volume of applications for assistance in Social Security and SSI, much less respond to rising claims that are associated with the aging of the baby boomers. The agency has received new responsibilities as part of the Medicare Modernization Act of 2003 and the Medicare Improvements for Patients and Providers Acts of 2008. As a result, SSA has experienced severe staffing shortages, which led to a decline, actually, in service delivery. In response, this committee has worked with our colleagues in the Appropriations Committee over the last 2 years to provide SSA with additional funding to allow them to begin to reduce the disability backlog. And the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act provided the agency with additional funds to address the recent increase in workloads. We'll continue to work with our colleagues and the administration to ensure the agency has the resources it needs to respond to individuals who need care. But it is now time for the agency to take bold steps to expeditiously reduce the length of time that a disability claimant must wait for a hearing. And it is imperative that this is done in a manner that firmly upholds programs' integrity so that benefits are only given to those who are eligible to receive them. It is also critically important that while SSA adheres to all the necessary program integrity measures, it remains mindful of the precarious circumstances facing a disabled applicant who is awaiting a decision for their application. Many go hungry and or lose their homes as they wait for a hearing and subsequent decision. Others go without desperately needed medical assistance and prescription drugs as they wait, and others see their health and medical conditions deteriorate. All of us in our district offices see these cases on a human basis. Meanwhile, a significant number of these applicants will eventually be determined to be rightfully eligible for benefits under the Supplemental Security Act and Social Security. Most are judged to be eligible. Clearly, more needs to be done to get these benefits out to the severely disabled Americans in a more efficient manner. 1.3 million people who are waiting for a decision to be made on their application deserve better. I'm pleased to see you here, Mr. Astrue, and we are eager to hear your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McDermott. I would, as the chair would ask that unanimous consent for any member who wishes to submit a statement, opening statement to the record, that be allowed without objection. And also the witness's testimony will be in the record in their entirety. We would ask, Commissioner, if you could hold your testimony to 5 minutes. We would appreciate it, and I'll try to ask the members to do the same. You recognize, sir.
Chairman Tanner, Chairman McDermott, members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to talk about the Social Security Administration's most important mission, service to the American people. Just over 2 years ago, on my second day as Commissioner, I testified here before you. Your frustration with mounting backlogs and service delivery issues was palpable, and to your credit, you recognized not only that the agency needed to be more efficient, but that Congress needed to provide more resources. I pledged to work with you toward that goal, and together we have made progress even in these difficult economic times, although not as fast or as far as any of us would like. Here are some examples of service improvement. At the DDS level, we have reduced processing time by about 4% in each of the last 2 years. New electronic triaging systems accelerate payment to those who clearly meet the medical listings. This year, for about 4% of all claimants, 100,000 to 125,000 Americans, the DDSs will improve their claims in about 10 days. New support tools for examiners, such as the ECAT system that is being tested in Michigan, Virginia, and Connecticut, are improving consistency and accurately. We are expanding a highly successful pilot to access electronic medical records. An enormous amount of time, cost, error, and delay comes from chasing down scattered paper medical records. A new paradigm for receiving medical records will allow us to make exponential improvements in the speed and quality of our decisions. We're working hard to update regulations on our medical listings, and we are on schedule to update all of them every 5 years. We are also expanding the listings to include rare diseases and conditions that clearly represent permanently disabling conditions. We hired and trained 190 new ALJs last year, and we expect to hire 157 more in the coming months. We plan to maintain a national average ratio of about 4.5 support staff per ALJ. At the hearing level, 2 years ago, we were facing stubborn increases of about 70,000 more cases each year with no relief in sight. Due to an effort to hold that number down, ODAR had been giving priority to the newest, easiest cases, and so the predictable happened. The number of what the agency calls aged cases skyrocketed. At the start of FY 2007, we had about 65,000 aged cases, which were then defined as 1,000 days or older, and some were as old as 1,400 days, which is simply obscene. We cleared out all but a handful of them that year. For FY 2008, we redefined aged as 900 days, and we resolved about 135,000 of those cases. We lowered the aged definition again this year to 850 days, and we are ahead of schedule to process those 165,000 cases. As difficult a challenge as this is, it is the right thing to do, so next year we will raise the bar on ourselves again. This decision is paying off. 2 years ago, the Atlanta hearing office had the worst average processing time in the country of about 900 days. Today, nobody is waiting that long, and the time in Atlanta is 550 days. In fact, the worst average processing time in the country is now 726 days, and we have improvement plans in place for the 30 most backlogged offices. For example, we are providing relief to hearing offices with the most pending cases by transferring cases to the National Hearing Center, and we're expanding the number of National Hearing Centers dramatically in the next few months. We're also adding 10 new hearing offices. We're adding additional satellite offices, and those new hearing offices are already well into the GSA site selection process. In some of our field offices, as the GAO reports, service has deteriorated because funding has not kept up with workloads. A key source of relief has been the public's use of our much improved electronic services. We have the 3 most user-friendly electronic services in the federal government as measured by objective surveys, and the public has embraced them enthusiastically. For instance, so far this year, about 33% of our retirement applications are filed online, up from only 10% 2 years ago. Without this choice, wait times in many offices would have been longer. Other efficiencies, such as replacement of our antiquated telephones, are underway, but the GAO is right that ultimately there's no substitute for adequate staff. Fortunately, passage of the Recovery Act and our annual FY 2009 appropriation will allow us to hire over 5,000 people by the end of the year. Please keep in mind, though, that productivity suffers while we hire and train this many new people, and that for the most part, these new employees will not fully contribute until next year. Your recent legislative action will make a huge difference going forward, and timely passage of President Obama's recommended appropriation for FY 2010 will make an even bigger difference. Lastly, I am pleased to report that we will send more than $13 billion in one-time recovery payments to eligible beneficiaries beginning in early May and continuing throughout the month, 3 to 6 weeks ahead of the statutory deadline. Again, thank you for your support. It has meant a lot to the agency. I look forward to continuing to build on our strong and productive working relationship, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for that timely presentation, and your statement will be submitted to the record. I just have one question, and then I'm sure the members will elaborate. You mentioned the electronic filing about 33%. I generally applaud efficiencies that can be achieved through electronic means otherwise. Do you have any data with regard to the error rate? Because as we know, when an application is not in order, then not only is it delayed, but it causes even more work.
Right.
And so as we try to go and streamline the system with the electronic, online, et cetera, we, I think, have to be sure that the error rate is not unacceptable. Do you have any data on that?
We do, and I appreciate that question because it's an important one. Our quality office has looked very carefully at the online applications versus the applications taken in the field office, and there's no statistical difference between the quality of the ones done in the office and the ones that are taken online. To the extent that there's a difference, the error rate is actually slightly higher for the ones that are taken in the office. So we're confident about that, and one should also keep in mind that this is not a fully automated process, that in every case there is, even on something taken online, there's an individual in the office who's looking at that application and does call people back if there's anything on the face of the application that would trigger any additional interaction with that person.
One other question then. When do you expect your plan to begin to take effect? You said 2 years ago that you had a plan to reduce, and now it's as bad or maybe in parts of the country worse.
Right.
With the additional revenue, can you give us a time frame as to what we can expect?
What we've done with the adjustments in the plan, and clearly with the sudden deterioration in the economy, we needed to go back and revisit the assumptions of the original plan. And there are some small differences, but the big one is we need an increase in capacity. So when we first developed this plan and when I first testified before this committee, we had embraced the figure of 1,250 administrative law judges as what we needed to drive the backlog down, and we were down at one point to just barely over 1,000. In order to meet the targets for driving the backlog down over the next 4 years, we're going to need more capacity. So we're targeting 1,400 to 1,450 judges. Right now, the budget assumption is that when we finish the FY 2010 hiring, assuming we get the appropriation that we hope from the President, consistent with the President's budget, and that we expand our space quickly enough. We have enough space for the hiring for the new judges now. It's a close call that we'll be getting as much as we need for FY 2010, but we're working hard on that. But if we hit the mark on the appropriation, we hit the mark with the GSA work, we should have, I believe, 1,452 judges at the end of that hiring. We lose about 60 a year to attrition, and that number is not even over the course of the year. The departures tend to be toward the end of the year. So we'll actually be momentarily over that target at the end of the hiring if everything goes according to projection. And we need that additional capacity to hit the original goals. Otherwise, we're not going to make it.
The judges are fine. What about the staff assistants that prepare the cases?
Right.
The judges can't, that's a problem too, I'm told.
It is indeed, and we will have a higher support staff ratio than we've had during most of this decade. We're targeting not only 4.5, but we're trying to keep to a floor of 4. There has been, I think, in my judgment, too much variation in hearing office support from hearing office to hearing office. So in addition to taking it up a tick to the 4.5, we're going to try to keep a floor of 4. Again, a couple people leave. The numbers will vary from time to time in offices for brief periods of time. But the goal is a floor of 4 and an average of 4.5, which should be adequate.
I may have some other questions to submit in writing to you. I don't want to take too much of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, along that line, how many judges are hearing less than 5 cases a year?
Less than 5 cases a year?
Yeah.
I don't think any now. We had one judge that was not hearing any case, hadn't heard a case for 6.5 years, and we've been working and counseling him. He's hearing about 50, I think, a year now, although I believe he's largely just allowing all those cases.
So we don't have anybody that's not pulling their weight right now?
No, we have certain judges that are pulled off for administrative work, and the president of the union, by the contract, is allowed to work full-time on union business, although to his credit, he does hear some cases.
When you say some, how many?
I do not have to check.
Okay.
We are now making that kind of information public, which we haven't in the
subject.
past.
Why did we learn just last year that the NCC had to be replaced? The center's apparently 30 years old, and surely somebody told you the problems that were existing there or were coming.
No, certainly coming in, I was not aware that this was a problem, and I was not aware that this was a problem until a bit into 2007. And I actually picked it up through our strategic planning process, where we said we got to look at what we need to plan for the future. And it was clear that this was a major issue for us. It took a little while to get a handle on it. There had been a part of the organization that had started to look at this, and there was a study pending that came in January of 2008. And it took a little time to push back and look at the options, because, you know, the first time someone comes in and says, I'd like to spend $750 million for a new facility, you don't say, oh, fine. So we spent several months going back and forth, seeing whether we could in any way extend the life of the existing facility, look at other options. And finally, we came to the conclusion that we really did need to replace it. It took a little while. We communicated that to the Congress after the May Senate Finance Committee
money
hearing.
to you. Let me interrupt you, because we understand what the problems are. I mean, I've seen pictures of some of the facilities over there, and it seems to me it's a big fire hazard. If that building burnt down today, if the NCC failed, what are the chances of you recovering the information that would be destroyed?
The chances of recovering the information that are destroyed are extremely high. We run backup tapes and take them to another location on a daily basis. So restoring the information.
Well, I was told you didn't have any backup. Where do you take them?
Well, there's two types of backup here, and there's been confusion. Even when I was talking to computer people recently, they got confused about it. And it's probably my fault in terms of communication. So there's two types of backup. There's the computer power to actually run the system, and then there's the storage for the data. So we take the data, again, if I'm making a technical error, we'll correct this for the record, but basically we take the data at a daily basis from the National Computer Center and take it to a separate location. So if there is that type of problem, we can access the data. The data doesn't disappear. We always have recent data. The issue is if there were a problem with running the National Computer Center, right now we do not have an adequate backup. We rely on a commercial facility in New Jersey that would only allow us to run about 10% of what we normally run, and it would be catastrophic until we came back online.
Well, if you copy those to disks and your computer system is so old, are there any computers that will run those disks after you copy them?
Well, we can run on the commercial facility in New Jersey. The problem is our system is so huge, there just isn't a commercially available facility that has the capacity to run all the transactions of the Social Security Administration
So
on a
what
daily
you're
basis.
saying is we'd have a failure. Would people fail to get their checks?
There would be a delay in people getting their checks. We would, once we got up and running, we would be able to get the checks out, but most of what we do on a daily, rest of what we would do, we would not be able to do until we get the National Computer Center back up.
And are you confident that we've got a plan in place to rectify that problem? And it seems to me that 2012 for Durham is an awful long way off, and I don't know how long it's going to take us to build a new facility.
So let me give you some good news on Durham. And I was just down at the facility about 2 weeks ago. The shell is up and completed. The first group of equipment is on the site and is being installed. It will take us about 6 months, in all likelihood, before we'll get Durham up to where it will be the equivalent of the New Jersey facility, and then we'll be adding additional capacity month by month after that. So we're in about 6 months, month by month, it will get better than the status quo. It won't be perfect. It'll take us another, probably we're moving a little faster than we were before. I would say about 18 months before we have Durham up to full capacity. I've also, with the stimulus money and additional resources, I've approved some amendments, some additional changes to Durham that will add capacity at Durham too. So we've got that coming too. So it is getting better. We have to hold on for at least 6 months, and at least it will be better than the status quo every month after that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Johnson, Dr. McDermott.
Mr. Astrue, I assume you're on the side of the clients in this issue. So the questions I ask really are to try and understand what's going on. Have you spent all the money that we gave you last year for additional people and space?
Absolutely. We went out and we had $148 million over the President's request, which was basically inflationary. And most of that went into backlog reduction. The most expensive part of that is hiring new judges. So we hired 190 new judges. The Inspector General, at our request, did a study of basically the fully loaded cost of an administrative law judge. Administrative law judge, fully loaded, is about $750,000 a year. So you can see that for that 148, most of that went into the additional judicial capacity.
Have they been working full-time for the last?
They are, but one of the things that, and again, this is where I know this isn't easy, where I have to plead for patience. The system is so complicated that it takes people a long time to become fully productive. We are thrilled by this class of judges. I think we did our job better in selection. We did more careful backgrounding check. These people are working very hard. We're getting very high grades on how they're treating people and all that type of thing. But in terms of productivity, I looked at the numbers just a couple weeks ago. After about 9 months on the job, for most of them, they're at about 3/4 of what a more experienced administrative law judge does. Now, the good news is that the trend line is up. They're going to get there, but it's probably going to take them about 12 to 15 months before they're fully productive.
What's troublesome is that the trend line about the numbers of days waiting is exactly the same for the last 2 years. It's over 500.
No, actually, so it's with all due respect, Mr. Chairman, it's down. We're down to 488, I think, right now. And again, it's not dramatically down, but the average processing times are down.
Source of this data is from you guys, Social Security Administration. So those two columns over here are the same, basically. And I'm not sure, I don't want to argue hours or days or whatever, but what I want to understand is what is it that holds up? Why is somebody at 75% productive? Why not 100%?
Because I think that
I mean, you've had a year.
The complexity of the system is mind-blowing. When you talk about every possible medical disease or condition known to man, what our rules are for them, and our systems take time to learn too, because we're increasingly automated and the systems aren't perfect yet. So we've got terrific people. I have no qualms about the effort that they've put in. I think a lot of these new judges are working extremely hard. And almost all of them are on a satisfactory track of productivity. There are a couple that are having some issues, but it just takes time. And it's the same thing with claims representatives, teleservice representatives. They're not productive immediately.
Anybody can see the trend of the line for the last 8 years. You don't have to be even close or have a reading test to see that trend. And the fact is that you're going to have 44% of your people retire by 2016. What's the planning for the future? Are we going to go into another climb in because we lose all the people who have been there a long time and take this knowledge out the door with them, and we get these new people in who have to learn the system from the ground up?
Well, in the good news, bad news category, with the economy changing, the retirement rates have slowed down a little bit. So it does buy us a little time with the expert. And again, I wouldn't wish that on anybody that doesn't want to stay.
You're not wishing against Mr. Geithner and the president, are you?
No. But we are trying to hire as many people as fast as we can. We have broadened and moved faster our SES candidate development pools. We've brought 14s in for the first time so that we've got a little bit broader pool. We'll have a slightly younger age distribution than what we had before to try to maintain some continuity. We're doing what we can, but at the end of the day, I can only hire as many people as we have the money to hire. We've moved extremely quickly.
How about space? Do you have problems with space?
Well,
somebody said it takes 24 months to get space out of GSA.
It does, and again,
What's the reason for that?
Well, there's several.
The military can put 500,000 people in Iraq inside of 3 months. Why can't GSA move a few people and get some offices open?
Well, I hear this with some regularity. I think within their rules, I actually think the people who are working for us have made this a top priority, and they are trying. But we have several things. First of all, we have to negotiate sometimes with as many as 4 different unions before we can go to GSA, because we have to have a plan that's going to work under the collective bargaining agreements. That takes some time. And then GSA has a bidding process to try to make sure that it's fair and objective. The kind of space that they choose, which I don't get to decide, they get to decide, makes a big difference. If they get space that's already existing, that fits our needs, that doesn't have to be redone, then we can often beat that 24 months. But sometimes they build space from scratch. Sometimes they will renovate. Sometimes they find space that's in move-in condition. We try to expedite this as much as we can. They have an inventory of excess space, and we've been all over that list, and we will sometimes move where we want to be if it doesn't make that much difference, if we actually think we can get into the space faster. So we've moved from having too much physical space because we lost so many employees that we were awash in space. When we all of a sudden are trying to hire 5,000, I think we're going to be okay for this fiscal year, but it is a potential limitation, particularly getting the space in the right places. Because for 20 years, and I don't know why this was true, the agency underallocated in the Midwest and the Southeast. And if you look at where the most backlogged hearing offices are, almost all of them, with all due respect to some members that this generalization won't apply, they're mostly in those parts of the country, and that's where the new hearing offices are going. And we're pushing to get them open as quickly as we can, and we're hoping it will not be a limitation next year.
Thank you. I apologize for taking more than my share time.
We'll go with the permission of the committee to two over here, since we have a great attendance this morning in the very highly interesting subject here. So may I call on Mr. Stark?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Astrue, thank you. If I could
just switch to a topic that has been a concern of mine for some time, and that is the issue of 30,000 children who receive SSA benefits and are in foster care. I don't want you to go auditing this, but as someone who receives this form for his own children each year, I'm aware of how closely you keep track of what my children receive and what I do with that. But I'm afraid that you don't keep as close track of the money that these children receive. For the benefit of my colleagues, children who, for one reason or another, SSI or because of disability or because of a parent who is disabled or dead, often receive Social Security benefits, a couple $100 a month. And if they happen to be in foster care, I think it's fair to say that almost automatically this money goes to the state. And states vary in how they use that money. I suspect there are a few states who just dump it into general revenue and could not account for the fact that it is used for these children. And there are arguments. Some say, why should foster children who are entitled to a Social Security benefit because of a disability or lack of parenthood have to pay out of basically their funds for foster care when other children don't? And I was going to see if I could ask Mr. Astrue if they're doing anything to review this. There's a system by which the representative, I guess it's called, is selected. But I doubt very much if you audit the states to see that each kid is entitled to some of this money. And the end result is that these are foster children who, in many cases, have mental disabilities, other problems, wherein a few $1,000s when they mature out of foster care could be a great advantage, either a way to get to college, a way to get their first apartment, to be independent living. And I guess my question is, are you doing anything now to study or consider how the states apply this money? I know California does a good job, and other states do, but as I say, I think some states just take the money and pop it into general revenue. Is there any program going on now in Social Security that's reviewing either how the representative is selected or what they do with the money?
We know of your interest, and I think it's a fair point, and it is on our list of things where we need to talk to OMB. They've only up for business recently on anything but emergency stuff very recently, and we have a fairly long list of things that we would like to talk to them about. We're prepared to look at that. I think, as with all questions with rep payee, we do have to go carefully because we want to make sure that we don't discourage people from being rep payees or state agencies, or because we do have difficulty in a lot of the country getting qualified.
It's a very small amount for most states, but these are, it seems to be, the most fragile.
We will take a look at it, and we actually, and again, I give you credit for your leadership in this area, because you did encourage us also to talk to California about the issue of seamless continuation, that there were foster care children getting lost in the cracks when they were re-reviewed under the adult standards.
Right, when they age out.
And when they age out. So we actually, we worked with Secretary Wagner in California on that. We have an improvement. It's a little awkward, but I think they're pretty happy with it, and we are now using that in other states. But part of what we want to do when we talk about foster care more broadly with OMB is there may be ways to make that a little bit more elegant and a little bit more efficient too. So we're looking at that as well.
Thank you very much. And I want to particularly thank your employees in both the Oakland and San Jose office
for the wonderful service they give our Fremont office.
That's good. Thank you.
To thank them for
Thank
me.
you. Thank you. I will do. Thank you, Mr. Stark.
Thank you, Mr. Stark. Mr. Linder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Astrue, you mentioned an administrative law judge who, in his contract, doesn't hear any cases because he's a labor union leader, and he spends
Yes.
full time on labor unions.
Yes, that's right.
How many are there such as that?
There's, I believe, the contract is a little complicated, but my understanding is that there's one who clearly does not have to hear cases, and that's the president of the union. There are, if I remember correctly, and if I apologize if I don't do this correctly from memory, I believe there are 125 other union officers who, at least under some circumstances, do reduced time, and how much reduced time gets a little complicated. So what I prefer to do is, rather than make a mistake on this, is double check that number and give you the full details of the collective bargaining
Right.
agreement in that regard.
Thank you very much. Why do you need it for labor unions to approve space with the GSA?
The working conditions are something that are covered under collective bargaining agreements, so we have to, as a general matter, as I understand it, go through and make sure that everything in the proposed space is compliant with the various collective bargaining agreements. And again, ODAR, where we're doing the hearing expansion, has all 4 unions that are represented at ODAR, so it's probably more complicated at ODAR than it is in most of the rest of the agency.
Why isn't that just a ministerial duty?
Pardon?
Why isn't that just a ministerial duty?
Because that's the way the Federal Labor Relations Act is written, is my understanding. We're just complying with the statute.
Federal Labor Relations Act?
Yeah, that's my understanding. I don't purport to be an expert on it, and it does get highly technical. We have an office that deals with those issues, but it's my understanding that those are the types of issues that we're required to bargain.
I share Sam Johnson's concern about your computer capabilities and the age of the technology. Have you done any studies as to whether it would be less expensive to outsource it?
We did. And actually, this study was, I believe, commissioned under Commissioner Barnhart's watch. So there was a study. Yeah, it was Lockheed Martin that took a look at the options and concluded that we really needed to have our own facility. I think part of the issue is we have enormous constraints in terms of the sensitivity of the private information of the public that's in there. It makes it awkward to share with other facilities. We need a huge facility because of the scope. There just aren't data centers like that sitting around.
You don't think Google and Microsoft have that kind of capacity?
Actually, not for what we need. No, I don't think so. Even the great Microsoft, I don't think has what we need on the shelf. And we have the final requirement is that we live in an age where it's not just the physical attacks of terrorists, but there's an enormous, and I don't think the public really appreciates what a concerted, constant effort there is on cyber terrorism. And I don't know whether the committee's had a recent confidential briefing on that, but it may be a good idea. And that also makes it very difficult to go the private sector route with everything that I think we need to do in order to meet those kinds of defenses. So I think we did make the right choice. Again, I didn't like the answer in the beginning either, and we spent several months going back and forth looking at alternatives and seeing whether there was another way to do it. But I think that we reluctantly concluded that this was the best path forward. I know we got a lot of those same questions from members of Congress and tried to be as transparent as possible. I'm very grateful that the Congress came to the same conclusion and so quickly, and it is going to make a huge difference for us going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Linder. Chair, please recognize Mr. Levin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Levin.
It's tempting for me to spend time talking about the problems in the district I represent, and these are immense problems, and we've talked about them. But I want to go beyond the vital local issues and get to the nub of this issue. And some of the discussion from the minority, I think, illustrates that. We've, in recent times, acted to raise the amounts of money that are available to you, right?
Yes, just in the last 2 weeks, we have a real break from past practice, and I think it is going to make a big difference going forward.
So let me ask you this. You've been involved in this work for how long?
Depends a little bit on how you look at it. Off and on for 30 years, okay. Probably 10 to some extent. And
involved with this government entity, right?
I was with HHS for 6+ years, some of it entirely at Social Security, but all that time at least partially doing Social Security work before I came back as commissioner.
So I want to ask you this. If the organization has adequate resources, do you believe that it is able to carry out the function of handling disability cases in an effective way?
I do, and let me add a couple caveats. We have, I'm persuaded, some of the very best people in government, and I include the people that do the work for us in the state disability determination services. I don't think it's a question of the people. I think it's been a question of the resources. We're facing all kinds of challenges now, particularly, you know, one of the things I'm working very hard on, and I got bad news from New Jersey this morning on the way to the hearing, is that more and more of the governors are furloughing DDS employees or putting hiring restrictions on, which is crazy because we pay the fully loaded cost. We pay their salaries. We pay for the overhead. They're not saving any money by doing this to DDS employees. And what they are doing is they're slowing up the processing of disability cases and keeping money out of their own states. And it's a real frustration to me that, again, we've persuaded a number of governors not to do this, but we had another one today in New Jersey that apparently decided to go ahead.
Okay, so you said if the resources are there, you have no question about the capability of this governmental entity to do the job well.
Yes, that's right, sir.
So what we heard earlier, and I want to look ahead, but this has to be very clear-cut, that this institution, under its leadership for a number of years, that provided inadequate resources, are essentially attacking the entity because it failed to provide the adequate resources. Which is essentially saying, and somehow it wants to hopscotch into health care, that SSA, you're not capable of doing this because you're a governmental agency. Who appointed you?
I was nominated by President Bush, and it was confirmed in the Senate in February of 2007.
Okay, so you're, and we welcome your efforts. And I really think that those who failed to provide adequate resources should not be the ones who are throwing the dagger at this agency. We, in the last months, have provided more resources instead of underfunding requests from the administration. At times we have gone beyond it. And I just say this because there's a real crisis in almost every place in this country. It is utterly disgraceful that people have to wait years, most of them clearly disabled, as it turns out. They have to wait years in order for a response. And the problem has not been because it's SSA running the show. The problem in good measure has been because of the failure of this institution under previous leadership to provide you the resources, as you say, that are necessary to carry out your work. And we're going to step up to the plate, and I hope we do that on a bipartisan basis. and we have done that. Mr. Johnson has been strong. He hasn't thrown arrows at SSA. He has been working with us to provide the monies that you need. And the sad thing is, even though, and I finish with this, we provide more resources, it's going to take you years to begin to catch up. We have to step up to the plate here, not to try to use this problem as an argument over something totally unrelated. We'll argue health care some other forum. We've got to give you the equipment, the resources, etc., that you need to end this disgrace.
Thank you, Mr. Levin. The chair will go to Ms. Berkeley, and then we're going on the rule at who was here when the gavel went down, and then to Mr. Brady after Ms. Berkeley.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for calling on me, and it's very nice to see you again. Last year, I shared with you the problems that I was having in my district, which encompasses Las Vegas, and you were very responsive to my concerns and my problems. As you are aware, with your help, Las Vegas ranked about 7th out of 143 offices nationwide last year, with a wait time of about 325 days. It wasn't anything to write home about, but it's far better than what has happened this year, where we've slipped to 60th and with a wait time of 458 days. I am asking you, on behalf of the people I represent, and you know I have a very large senior population and growing population, and with the latest economic downturn, Las Vegas has suffered disproportionately, and it shows in the number of claims that continue to rise on a daily basis. What can you do, and what can I do to help you ensure that Las Vegas doesn't slip any further? And what can we do to improve not only the quality of service, but the number of people we have hearing these claims?
Las Vegas, as you pointed out, I agree with you, it has been one of our better offices, but you are also correct that there has been some slippage this year. That's not uncommon, that there are places in the country. This is why it's so hard to keep up on space, because the demographics change so quickly. We have, for the 3 judges that are there, you have one of the higher support staff ratios in the country. So I don't think it's that, but I'm looking at your pending. Your judges are staying productive, but the pending is going up. That's just a function of caseload. So what we try to do in these, if it gets really much worse than this, what we're trying to do is to take that pressure off of offices by moving cases electronically. And we will have substantial additional capacity in the coming months. The Albuquerque National Hearing Center, which is actually designed to help offices in the western part of the country, if I remember correctly, should start to be operational next week. We have a much larger one for Chicago that will be open up over the summer, and then we'll have another one in Baltimore. Right now, we don't have enough capacity in that way to help out those offices such as yours when there's a surge in cases. We'll have that infrastructure in place to do an awful lot better in about 6 months. And so I would say hang on. We'll do the best we can. We'll look at it as well. We are looking at a potential additional expansions, additional hearing offices. It may be that if these numbers hold up, that you need at least a 4th judge, and we need to look at the space situation in Las Vegas. I suspect that somebody has already done that, and I'm not aware of it. But so let me do this. Let me supply for the record a little bit more detail, but we'll be on it. We'll get back to you with more information.
I appreciate that. Let me ask you something. You just stated if it gets much worse. How much worse does it have to get to be red flagged?
Well,
because it's going to get worse in
yeah,
Vegas. It's very bad.
So I have to be candid here. Even at 364 days, which is the most recent month, that's still significantly better than our national average.
Well, I have 458 days. It was 325 days last year when we were 7th. We're in 60th place now with a wait time of 458 days.
If you just have October numbers for reasons I could take up the hearing explaining are atypical. But what I have in front of me is through February, and what my staff is telling me is 364 days. I'll check that and verify that. I'll be honest with you, normally 364 is not a place yet where we intervene. We still have offices with this rate that are helping out others around the country. But as you get close to the median, we start looking, and the median right now is about 488, and we start looking at the possibility of additional help. But I'll be honest with you, it's not a science, it's an art. We're trying to do the best we can with what we have. We'll have more ability to help offices. We'll have 620. We should have about 30 additional National Hearing Center judges shortly.
Okay, time is up. All right, thank you very much.
Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. And before I begin my questioning, I would point out that I think this is a bipartisan problem. Pending cases and the backlogs have not materially improved over the last 2 years under Democrat control of the House and the Senate. I think looking at Mr. Tanner, Mr. Johnson, we have bipartisan support for, significant actions to reduce those backlogs, and are committed to working with you to do that. I want to turn to the issue of fraud in the disability system. By some estimates, it may be as much as $11 billion in fraud. Hard to quantify that, but that is one of the estimates. I think we all have responsibility to taxpayers and the truly disabled to make sure these precious dollars aren't lost to fraud and those who are gaming the system. Recently had the opportunity to meet with Inspector General O'Carroll down in Houston with our cooperative disability investigative program. Got to look at firsthand the teamwork on the front end of disability fraud, those who are applying for benefits and may be feigning impairments, concealing medical improvement, and other fraudulent activities. Seems to me, at least in the Houston region in Texas, there seems to be a good job. We do a good job of catching fraud at the front end of the disability system. On the back end, though, it appears to be just the opposite, that the backlog of continuing disability review, especially medical review cases, continues to grow. It's about 1.4 million today. It's anticipated it will grow another 100,000 to 150,000 cases next year. Those investigations on the back end take more time, more resources, and they are both the medical issues as well as those concealing work. At the end of the day, though, fraud occurs. When we do launch these investigations, as Congress did, funded a 7-year program from 1996 to 2002, we made progress on that, dedicated funding to do that. Since then, Congress has not dedicated funding to those investigations, and the backlog has grown, and the funding recoupments have decreased or leveled off. It seems to me that studies show that we're saving between $10 and $14 for every dollar we invest in those fraudulent and investigations of fraud. So the question is, Commissioner, what is the game plan for attacking that growing backlog of continuing medical reviews, disability reviews, and what are the resources you need to successfully investigate and prosecute those fraud cases?
Okay, thank you. 2 questions. Let me deal with the CDI cases first. The Inspector General's office has done some great work with these units. It is a very high return to the taxpayer. The problem that we have with those units is the dollars compete against everything else that everybody wants us to do, and it's directly competing against service dollars. I think until there is some sort of funding mechanism so that it refreshes itself, that it probably is going to be the case that in the grand scheme, those efforts are going to be underfunded.
Did the dedicated stream of funding help provide continuity and certainty when building those teams? Because it is a team effort.
Yes.
In actually pursuing them?
Absolutely. And we have no specific, we've discussed this type of thing with OMB. I think they're interested in this and for program integrity work, generally looking for other ways so that it doesn't diminish over time. You know, for most of this decade, not only did the backlogs get worse, the amount of program integrity work plummeted. So we've not only made a first dent in the backlogs, but we've also started increasing the program integrity work. But we have some real issues in gearing up, and that a lot of our capacity has been lost, and it will take time to get up and get up to where we need to be. So I think you will see in the more detailed president's budget that's coming next month, the proposal for fiscal year 10. And my sense is that they see that as a transition and they want to do more and better the year after, but they realize that we need to build up some capacity to get there. So my sense is that this new team at OMB is very concerned on the program integrity side.
Well, Chair, would you present to at least the Social Security Subcommittee and perhaps to the Income Support Subcommittee a plan for tackling that backlog and estimates of resources to do that? Because I think the subcommittee ought to take a look at what it's going to take in real terms, you know, as we weigh recommendations on budget issues and resources.
What I'd propose is I think that this will be a better conversation in about a month after the President's budget is fully released, and we can see what the full assumptions are for next year, and then talk about what we might do in the subsequent. But we'd be delighted to come up and have that conversation.
Right, appreciate that. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, if I could state for the record, I've got a national ranking report, average processing time, month ending 2/27/2009, which shows that the Las Vegas processing time is 458. So if you have something different, I'd appreciate seeing it. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if you give me just a moment, let me just talk here for a moment. This is cumulative for the year. What happened in the month of February? Okay. Okay, I think we've sorted out the 10 seconds.
Yeah.
So what I have in front of me is the statistics for this fiscal year. So I've been reassured that 364 is correct for the fiscal year. What you have is for the most recent month, which is February. And there are some reasons why, particularly when they're tackling older cases, there tend to be bizarre fluctuations from month to month. Month-to-month comparisons can be fraught with danger. But you are correct that for the month of February, the average processing time was 458. What that may reflect is they move from run-of-the-mill cases to going back to hitting some of the aged cases. I don't know, but we'll give you a more detailed analysis of. So I guess I'd like to say I think we're both right. So, okay.
Commissioner, let me ask. You told me something I was unaware of. I thought the IG and the anti-fraud sector had its own budget. You said it was in competition with service dollars.
They do, but we also
am I incorrect in that?
They have their own separate budget, but we also have the capacity with our administrative budget to spend more on anti-fraud if we choose to do so, and we could if we had the resources to do it. And I think a lot of us would like to do that, but right now, you know, you have to take that away from telephone service or CDRs or backlog reduction, and we just don't have the option of doing that. In fact, there's been some concern as there have been some of the IG recommendations over the years. I mean, we've accepted about 2,500 of his recommendations in recent years of the 2,700 that he's made. And a lot of the ones that we have not accepted, we just don't have the resources to do what they're recommending, usually from an anti-fraud point of view.
On the CDR evaluations, I'm told that runs around 95%, and 5% are found to be improved to the point where they're no longer eligible. Is that?
Let me double check. I think it's a little smaller than that.
Could you please?
No, you're correct, Mr. Chairman. That's about right.
All right. So but CDR is different from fraud.
Yes, that's right.
Is that correct?
I mean, every once in a while, a CDR case will pick up
yeah,
a fraud, but you're right.
Basically, which means you're doing a pretty good job on the front end of determining who's permanently disabled and who's not.
Yes, that's right. And there's a fairly small number of cases where there's a possibility of medical improvement, or it was borderline in the beginning. Probably about half of the applicants, you don't realistically expect that there's even a real chance that they will come off the rolls.
Okay, all right. Ms. Schwartz, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this hearing. And I actually recall a similar hearing, I guess, was it last year, 2 years ago?
Yes.
Where we had some of the same conversation, I have to say, about backlog, and I realize you're making some progress. But certainly all of us in our districts hear from constituents who are very frustrated by the number of days, and obviously that they have to wait, and they are all in some dire straits and feel that way. I specifically wanted to ask you about something you mentioned in your opening comments, which should help this process, and that is the use of technology and information technology, particularly transmission of the medical records,
right.
and helping to expedite that situation. A couple of questions, if I may, on this, because I have great optimism, if I want to put it that way, in the fact that technology in the healthcare field can make a very big difference in streamlining time and savings for all of us within healthcare delivery and personal healthcare, but in this situation as well, the ability to get that information and to review it quickly. Now, there's some stumbling blocks on this, and one of them is your own system and the degree to which you can receive this information. But the other, of course, is the providers and whether they actually have the capacity at this point to provide you with that information,
right.
And adequate information. So I want you to speak to that and the timing on, again, not only your preparation, but those who are submitting that information. Second question is the issue of consent and the role the applicant has in providing that consent. I assume they do it now in releasing the information, but making sure that that is secure. You again pointed out the degree to which there are opportunities for concern about privacy, but I would suggest that it is dealt with in healthcare situations, but maybe you want to speak specifically to how you handle very sensitive information that is now sent electronically and might be more readily available to others or not. And third question, if you would, is to speak to, you're not over-anticipating the good use of technology by reducing the number of people you need, the personnel you need, because in fact we're not quite ready to do all of this, and whether in fact you still have the adequate personnel to handle the applications in a timely fashion. And while I will say that Philadelphia is not worst on the list by any means, in fact we actually do I understand, a pretty good job and have a great relationship with the offices in Philadelphia and the surrounding area, we still are looking at almost 400 days, 377. Now you're reducing those number of days. That's a lot of days for people to wait. So if you kept track of those questions, if you would speak to them,
try.
And if not, I'll
miss
through
one,
it. But again,
I
am very supportive of the use of technology and health IT. I think this is all to the benefit of my constituents and to those who are applying, and can really help streamline the process for you and for your staff. But I do want to make sure that you are prepared. Doctors' offices can get you that information, that you haven't reduced personnel too quickly in handling that, and that you've dealt with the issues of privacy.
First of all, let me reassure you that there's no substitution of technology for people. I think a lot of the staff here will back me up. I've been up here regularly and often complaining about the fact that I don't have enough people, and that the continuing resolutions have forced us to do some very damaging reductions in staff. And that's why we added for the first time in the back of your written test. I know it's long and it's dull, but look at the back, and you can look at the staffing patterns and the effect of the continuing resolutions, and they really have been devastating for us. So we need as many people as we can reasonably get. I don't think there's any likelihood Congress is going to give me more than we can productively use anytime soon. But we also need to use the best technology, because we need to do both. We need to simplify our procedures when we can, too. We need all three in order to provide the best service that we can at any point in time. Now, you are absolutely right that the health information technology could be incredibly important for us. And I want to give Deputy Commissioner Gray, who runs systems for us, credit, because, of course, he takes heat every time a computer blows somewhere in the 60,000 employee office. But he was very forward thinking in realizing how important this could be for us. We spend an enormous amount of effort chasing down medical records from multiple sources, and often we make decisions on the basis of incomplete medical records, which is a source of error. People do the best they can as fast as they can, but particularly there's a misunderstanding of HIPAA, too, in a lot of places, and they don't want to, or they just simply don't turn over records to us easily. So this is a big deal for us.
Well,
so one of the things
that may be an issue that maybe we could be helpful if you're not getting the kind of response that you might need from a different department, different federal agency. Maybe that's something that we, particularly as there's new administration, there's a new health IT head of that office who may be more responsive on this and be able to work with you on that.
The key, which maybe we should come up and brief you on in more detail, is that Systems did a pilot with Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital in Boston, which, because of John Halamka, who's now on our new Systems Advisory Board, is right in the forefront of health IT, and they've done more there. We've had a pilot where we've been working out the technical issues, privacy, security over the internet, all those types of things that are raised by our using health IT, and getting to a point where if there's a Beth Israel patient that authorizes us to get the records, we can push a button, and we've got it, and we've got a complete record, and it's a thing of beauty, and it increases accuracy, it cuts down on administrative time, it cuts down on cost, and we're going to try to get as much of the country moving in this direction as quickly as we can. And I don't remember, it's still a work in progress. We've got 8 to 10 healthcare systems that we're talking to around the country to try to take the Beth Israel Deaconess model and use it as quickly as we can. And we've got some progress, I know, in Virginia. We've got other states as well.
Because I said there are, and I believe I'm running out of time here, but I just want to say there are a number of health systems across this country. Obviously, we made a major commitment financially in the recovery package to scale that up to 70% of hospitals and 90% of physicians in this country within 10 years. But I realize that takes a while. But there are major health systems that do have electronic medical records that probably would be ready, willing, and able to help if they had a...
Most of them are not quite there yet, but we think they're getting there very quickly. And, you know, if we could, for instance, duplicate Beth Israel Deaconess with one of the ones that is further ahead, like Kaiser Permanente, which is a huge operation.
Yes.
Be huge for us. So the issue is not, we've worked out a lot of the technical issues. Again, there's still some fine tuning of what needs to be done. I don't want to oversimplify the tasks that we have ahead of us.
But you got $40 million in the recovery package that I'm assuming is going to help you move ahead on
We
this.
can spend up to $40 million of our $500 million on health IT.
I hate to
and we will
interrupt.
probably
We've got
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
many members who here. We've got some time constraint.
I'm sorry, I
Mr.
apologize.
Rockert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My previous life, I was in law enforcement for 33 years, and so I dealt with a lot of people that were, attempting to get their Social Security checks and their Social Security benefits, and this was a long time ago, as you can tell by the color of my hair, unfortunately.
Well, at least you have hair.
Good point, sir. I just want a little bit of a historical perspective. It seems to me, and not being experienced in this whole, this is my first visit here to this committee, and I'm very fortunate to be here. But I think most American people look at, IRS and Social Security, and it's just this long history of problem after problem after problem. I don't think the backlog issue is something that's just occurred within the last 2 years or the last 4 years or the last 6 years or 8 years, or as we might be led to believe by some members here. But this has been an issue that's been going on almost since Social Security probably began. Don't you agree?
Yes. We had hearings on this issue, if I remember correctly, in the 1980s when I was with the agency, and it is a tough one. I think part of what's going to be important for us to communicate more is what we think a proper baseline is. It does take claimants some time to get legal representation, accumulate their medical records, and then about 85% of the claimants are represented to give them time to do their job. And we've had a good discussion with the advocacy groups about how much time that is, and they said, you know, the preparation time you give us is too short. So we're looking at 270 days as the baseline for delivering a hearing, and part of that is factored in is probably 60 to 75 days for the claimant's representatives to get ready and a little time on the front end for them to get organized. So it's giving us less than 6 months to do what we need to do.
Well, when it comes to the hearing, I'm from Washington State, and I think our wait time is about 1.5 years, 507 or plus days or so. One of my constituents, who's a Social Security lawyer from my district, he helps people navigate through the disability claims process, says that there's kind of a perception that there's a bias against deciding claims favorably at the early stages of the process. And his view is that a majority of the claims will be denied at the early stages, and then the ALJ will later give a favorable decision. He says there's a sense that in the community that this is purposeful because it prolongs the system and then encourages people to drop out and saves money. Have you heard this before?
Oh, yes. This was a charge made in a CBS Evening News piece a couple years ago. Interestingly, the woman that coined the phrase cultural denial in that interview cornered me last week in a meeting to commend us for how much better we were doing in the Atlanta area where she works. But I understand what it looks like on the other side. You know, you have a lot of people that even if they don't qualify are very sympathetic people, and the system is slow and people get frustrated. A lot of times it gets very toxic in terms of how they feel toward the agency. So I understand that on a human level, but if anything, I think if you talk to people in the DDSs, there's a presumption toward allowance, not the other way in the closed cases.
Do you keep track of the dropout rate? Do you know?
I'm not sure what you mean by the dropout rate.
If there are people who are actually just giving up, falling out of the system and say, I just can't go through this any longer.
Yes, we do.
And do you know what that is, what that rate is?
It depends on the period of time, and it's changing rapidly. So why don't we supply you with some information?
Please, and then do you attempt to extend a hand to these people who are dropping out, to search them out and bring them back into the fold? You don't have time to do that, probably.
No, we don't do that. What we are trying to do is look at some ways. A lot of times the people that come that don't qualify, there are places they can go to get help, and we are looking, you know, we can't have that conversation efficiently one by one, but we are looking through our notices and electronically to see whether we can provide more information to help people in those situations.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Higgins, we're glad to have you here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, can you help us? You've touched on it a little bit, but can you, for sake of context, just kind of walk us through generally and briefly the process of making an application for Social Security disability and what follows that?
Sure. There's been an uptick recently. About 22% of the people file now online, as opposed to about 5% a few years ago. And we have not improved that form yet. We have an improvement that's coming. It's a few months away. We also want to have a Title 16 application form. Now, if you're Title 16, you have to actually come into an office and go through the process. Typically, though, still people come into the office, they have an interview, there's intake is done in a field office, and then that information is transmitted to the state DDS. We have about 15,000 employees who are state employees but work full-time for us deciding these cases. Most of those states have 2 levels of review, an initial decision and what we call reconsideration. There are parts of about 10 states, some states in total, some states in part, that from an initiative of 10 years ago don't have reconsideration, called prototype states. So sometimes there's recon, sometimes there's not. When the state has made a final decision, it goes up for a full hearing before an administrative law judge. We get about, this year it should be in the neighborhood of 650,000 of those a year. We'll get about 3 million applications. And then there's a relatively small number of cases that go within an agency appellate board, and then they go up to the federal court from there.
It sounds very bureaucratic. Is it necessary? Could the process be streamlined?
Well, it's a bit of a holy grail in the agency, and one of the problems with a lot of the efforts to make it better is that the law of unintended consequences kicks in and it's made it worse. So we're constantly looking at efforts to streamline. Some of the most dramatic streamlining probably would have to come from this room. Right now I try to work within consensus and try to make the system within the consensus work as compassionately and quickly as possible. A lot of the things that you would need to do in order to cut out a lot of that would require legislative change.
You had indicated you went from 5 to 22% of those applying online?
For disability, that's right.
Ideally, what's the goal there relative to online?
There's no goal. My feeling is that it's a choice for individuals, and that and they'll decide that for us, and that we should provide the best service in the office and the best service we can online. We're not where we want to be online with the disability yet, but we'll be there fully some point next year.
Assuming you were fully funded,
right.
What would be the likely time from one making an application to a final disposition on said application?
Well, I think that the biggest opportunity for collapsing the time up front for the biggest number of people is exactly what Congresswoman Schwartz mentioned. If an enormous amount of the time, money, and effort is spent chasing down scattered medical records on paper in lots of different locations, a lot of times the claimant doesn't even know where the medical records are, and our people really do fairly heroic work trying to chase those down for the claimants. If we can eliminate that and go to a centralized single record for most Americans, I mean, you have an average. We've been cutting down the time in the DDSs, but ballpark, a little under 100 days first go around, probably a little under 100 days for recon. We might be able to cut that by 2/3 if we can really integrate with electronic medical records in the way we think we can in the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, the shame is, this is obviously a systemic problem, but it hits probably the most vulnerable population of folks. Right. And, we have a situation in Buffalo that is, unacceptable on its face. And while some good progress has been made, it's only within the context of a horrible situation that we started with. But progress is being made, which I think is good. But obviously, this is not a problem unique to Buffalo, right, but obviously hits a place like Buffalo particularly hard as well. So,
the other thing that's important, I think the agency historically had a fairly high threshold for defining in its rules whether someone was disabled or not. Matter of fact, we had to see a lot of cases of that. And my view is that that's wrong, that cumulatively there are an awful lot of cases that we weren't giving guidance on, and that's where an awful lot of the error and an awful lot of the delay was. So we're not just making the listings, medical listings, more current. We're trying to drive them down into a lot more rare diseases and conditions. And when we can, and when we know a lot of those are automatically disabling, we're trying to, with the electronic screening, to just pick those out and allow those. And as I said in my testimony, we're at about 4% now. There's no science. We've gone from 2.7 to 4 in the last year. We were at 0 the year before. We think we can get to 6 to 9% of the cases that can be decided in that way. And right now it's an average about 10 days, and we hope we can do that a little bit quicker. We're looking at, we've got some old rules that are process rules that we're looking at getting rid of, and so we might even be able to take that 10 days and make it 5 days, and if we can do that, we will.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Yield back.
Mr. Lewis, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for holding this hearing today. Mr. Commissioner, how long have you been Commissioner?
A little over 2 years.
Over 2 years. Mr. Commissioner, as you know, I represent Metro Atlanta. The Atlanta and Atlanta North hearing offices have some of the worst backlogs in the nation. Although there have been some improvement, not much since the last time that you were here.
Well, actually, Mr. Lewis, I think I would disagree with you. When I had my first hearing here just over 2 years ago, Atlanta and Atlanta North were the two worst in the entire country. Atlanta was at 900 days, and Atlanta North was a little bit south of that. Today, Atlanta's at 550, so we've cut almost a full year in 2 years off the Atlanta times, and we're at about 667, if I remember correctly, for Atlanta North. I agree with you that that's not acceptable, but we have a new office coming, which we're calling Atlanta South. It's centered in the Covington area. When that office opens, we ought to have all the offices in the Atlanta office, I would think, better than the national average. So we're making a lot of effort in Atlanta, big effort with National Hearing Center. We put 4 electronic hearing rooms into the Marietta field office to try to accommodate that. We've put an extraordinary effort into trying to improve what was 2 years ago the worst situation in the country, and it's not now.
Well, Mr. Commissioner, in Atlanta, I believe people are waiting 561 days. In Atlanta North, they wait 668 days for a hearing. People shouldn't be waiting that long.
I agree with that, but it is significantly better than 2 years ago, and there is.
I agree.
And there's reason.
I'm not going to argue with you.
Yeah.
It is better,
right? But
it's not much better. Waiting that long is too long. What has been done in Atlanta to address the issue? I'm frustrated. I keep hearing you talking about the union, GAO, OMB. Have you asked for more money during the past 2 years, more resources?
Absolutely.
Did you get it?
No, not very promptly. I mean, you have to remember, first 6 months of this year, we've been on a continuing resolution. Last year, we got, $148 million over the president's budget. I went back to OMB to ask for authority. That budget was not mine. That was Commissioner Barnhart's budget. But to argue for $100 million over president's budget, it's very unusual to get that permission, and we got it. So I've been fighting for this agency's resources, and we've been trying to put them where they should have been for decades, and they aren't. And Atlanta has always been #1 on my list. And in the first group of new hearing offices we approved was Atlanta South to take the pressure off of the Atlanta Downtown and Atlanta North offices. So it's going to take time for the permanent solution. But in the meantime, we've put Office of Quality people in prepping cases. We've had the National Hearing Center. The first test of the National Hearing Center were Atlanta Downtown cases. We put an extraordinary effort in the short run to bringing those horrendous numbers down. We've made progress. I agree with you, it's not good enough, but there is more coming, and we're doing the best we can as fast as we can.
As you take a look, the long, hard look, what are you doing about planning for the future in terms of resources, dollars, people, space?
We try to have, I think, a much more disciplined strategic planning process than we've had before. I think in the past, the agency's strategic plan, which was required by OMB, was not much more than a revision of the budget document. We didn't do that. We went through a very serious process to say, what are our long-term needs? What are we not looking at that we need to plan for? And there are a number of things that we are doing now over the long run that are only going to make my life harder in the short run, because I'm not going to be here to get the benefit of it, that we're working on. Replacement of the National Computer Center, we're replacing the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, which the Department of Labor stopped updating in 1991. So we're taking a number of things where the agency had not been focused on what we needed to do over the long run to deliver service to the American people, and we have tried to identify those through our planning process and suck it up to make the investment, even though there's a lot of pressure to put money in a lot of other places in the agency right now. We're not trying not to forfeit the long-run future of the agency.
Mr. Chairman, is there anything that can be done to make the decision in the front end rather than at the back end?
Yes, we're doing that as best we can. And again, we have new systems in place to try to define those cases that ought to be automatic up front. That's gone from a small pilot with a handful of cases in 2 years to now 4% of the country is benefiting from that. And our goal is to get that to 6 to 9% in the next few years. So that's a matter of updating and being much more specific and much more detailed about the medical listings. And we've been doing that. We've been doing that extremely quickly. So that's one example of what we're trying to do. We also have got some new computer systems in place that are promising in terms of queuing and reminding examiners on the front end of what they need to do and what they need to document to lift the quality of the cases. It's not quite ready for prime time, and we have a problem right now in that right now we have 54 separate IT systems for the states on different spines. And it means every time we have something that can improve processing, it's long, slow, and expensive to roll it out. So what we're trying to do, and we've got the states behind this now, and this failed once before 10 years ago, is a common IT system to get away from the COBOL, to get away from the legacy systems, and a web-based system for all the states that when we have things that will improve things for claimants, we can roll it out very quickly. Right now, I can't. The money and the technology won't let me do it. And so that's why it's really important that some of these IT improvements, we get as much support as possible, and the states stay behind this, because otherwise the improvements that the smart technical people can make aren't going to get out there very quickly to help people, and that's what I want to do.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Meek, then Mr. Davis, and Mr. Becerra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm glad we have witness back once again. I was here 2 years ago when you testified before us, and as you know, I'm from Florida, and actually your office is right across the parking lot from my office, so I do get a first-hand dose of individuals that are very concerned with the lack of movement. I was handed a national ranking report here, average processing time, and I'm looking at this, and I can't help but notice, and I'll start with Orlando. It says in Region 4, we have 476 days to process, and I would even go beyond that, because you look at it from days, you really can't get a full appreciation for the time that people have to wait. That's 111 days over a calendar year. You look at Jacksonville, Region 4 again, 492 days. That's 120 days over a 12-month calendar year. You look at Tampa, 532, which is 167 days over a calendar year, and the office is right across the street from right across the parking lot from my office, has 674 calendar days, which is almost 2 years, just short of 2 years, 309 days over a 365-day calendar year. When you're dealing with individuals, and as you all know, and everyone over at the department knows, you're dealing with folks that 9 times out of 10 are dealing with the muddiness of life, and they're trying to make a claim. And guess what? A supermajority of those individuals that come to my office end up winning their appeal. And I can't help but think that this has to be a major concern of yours and the department. Now, I know you're here asking us to do things, and I believe we have, and we will continue to do things as we make life better for the agency. But I could tell you, it is just truly, it's hard for members, for them to repeat what you've already said, that we understand we have a problem, we understand we're trying to work through it, but there has to be a way that we can look at these appeals at a faster rate, especially now in this bad economy. So I wanted to ask you, as it relates to our financial situation, our present footprint right now in this economy, and individuals that are filing, that are being denied, that are being placed in the appeals process, has there been any change whatsoever, any consideration taken by Social Security as it relates to these claims that have been made, of understanding the financial strain that these applicants are under right now?
Well, we do understand the strain that people are under, and that's why we have more and more mechanisms for the people that are truly entitled to try to identify them on the front end and pay them their benefits as close to immediately as possible. It is still a very difficult statutory standard. There are a lot of very sympathetic people that don't qualify for benefits, and that's your choice. It's a very expensive one. What we try to do is we try to implement the statute as fair and square as possible. It has been difficult with the resource levels. Now, Florida is one of the states where, as with Georgia, Michigan, and Ohio, that has been systematically under-resourced over the years. And we are moving to address that. So in the first round of hearing offices was Tallahassee, and in the second round that we sent to GSA was the Tampa-St. Petersburg area. So there is help coming. Approximately 15 additional administrative law judges for the state of Florida. But I do want, at some point, I think it is a credit to the people in this agency that with this economy, that they are still making service improvements and that we haven't had a significant deterioration in service, that we've been making small progress. And that's also been in a time of very tight dollars until 2 weeks ago. I was well into my third year as a commissioner with one appropriations bill. I have spent the majority of my time managing this agency under a continuing resolution. And that forces hiring freezes, that chokes off the very people who can help the people that you want to help. Now, again, I'm not criticizing this committee. This committee has been, and the Finance Committee, have been extraordinarily useful in making the case to your colleagues. But I think a lot of your colleagues in the Congress still don't understand what it is that they've been doing to this agency. And we need you and the others on this committee to continue to be our advocates for that, because we can't do it without your help. If we're back on continuing resolutions, you're just going to see the quality of the service go down.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make sure the witness is able to share with us what we may need to know, may not necessarily we all want to hear. But I think at the same time, we are properly motivated. I know I am, because many of our cases outside of immigration cases in Florida that come through my district office is dealing with the very claims that we're talking about here today. And I just want to make sure that there was maybe more license to be extra sensitive in these very hard times. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Meek. Mr. Davis, Chair, please recognize you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And let me just agree, Commissioner, that continuing resolutions do hamper movement into projected budget activity for the coming year, or even the year that we might be in. When I look back, though, it seems to me that decreased funding back during what I would call the Bush Senate kind of started us to escalate in relationship to a backlog. I was also thinking that if we've had a lot of conversation in relationship to increased applications due to the recession. Let me ask, what specific do you plan to put in place, do you have in place to make use of the stimulus money that is going to come to the agency, and how do you view that helping to reduce the backlog?
Right. So here's the good news and the bad news. We need more people. As of a couple weeks ago, we had the money to do it. We are working as hard as we can to go out and try to hire before the end of the fiscal year. And we'll probably fall a little bit short because no one's perfect. About 5,000 people. That's huge for us. I mean, we've had to move people around just to put in the infrastructure back in to try to hire at that level. So we are trying to do that. We are also assuming, and you know, I may hang on to regret this, that that Congress will accept that we need more of this infrastructure in the baseline in the hearings office. And it's, if we end up being told we've overbuilt and we're back, on level funding again, then there'll be consequences for having built up that infrastructure. But we've decided to take the leap of faith that Congress is sufficiently concerned about the backlog, that when you say we need 15% more capacity than we had a couple years ago, that Congress will continue to support that, and that's pretty critical for us.
I couldn't help but perk up a little bit when I heard my friend from Atlanta, Mr. Lewis, indicate that he was frustrated.
Yeah.
And I said to myself, if he is frustrated, then I must be devastated.
Yeah.
Because when I look at the Chicago experience, and I look at the fact that we have actually gotten worse by 95 additional days, and then when I hear that there are plans to open some new offices in the Midwest region or in the Chicagoland area, but those offices are not scheduled for Chicago. As a matter of fact, they are scheduled for other locations, and it's my understanding that the decision is based upon under allocations or the fact that they may have not been adequately staffed earlier. But it seems to me that if we have gotten 95 days worse in terms of a waiting period in Chicago,
yeah,
something must already exist or something must be going on.
Sure.
That caused this discrepancy.
So the way we're doing this is, I think, the way that if we could all get in a room, we would agree is the right way to do it. Is we're trying to work down from the places where it's the worst and come down. So we have still in a placeholder for 2 more, possibly 3 more hearing offices. The staff came up with the 4 recommendations that they have. I took a quick look at that, and I looked at the national numbers, and I am concerned that, and that's this next round, that the Chicago area is one of the ones that we need to have a discussion about. So there is for the placeholder discussion, we've actually, the straw man right now is for Gary, Indiana, because ODAR doesn't respect state lines, and there's support across states. And we're trying to have a conversation about if we do in the Chicago area, what makes the most sense? How does that line up against the other 4? So I can't tell you that we've made the decision to do that, but I don't disagree with you that you're in the next tier of offices where we need to think about additional support, and we may make that decision within the next few weeks. So we're close, but we're not there yet.
Well, let me thank you very much, and let me thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll just say that I certainly empathize with Gary a great deal, but I always remember my mother who told us that charity begins at home and spreads abroad. So I've got to be concerned about Chicago, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Becerra.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing. Commissioner, thanks for being with us again. Let me just repeat a few things. 1,300,000 Americans waiting for a decision on their application for disability benefits. Taxpayers, seniors, people who have contributed to the system that makes it possible for you and I to be here to talk about a disability system for Americans who have worked and now become disabled. 1,300,000 of them waiting for a decision on whether they can finally receive benefits for which they paid when they were working. Total wait time on an appeal of a decision, as long as 2 to 4 years. Since 2000, the number of people waiting for a hearing on their disability claim has more than doubled, from 310,000 to more than 765,000 as of February 2009. For far too many years, Commissioner, this government has disrespected tax-paying Americans, American seniors who have earned the right to have a disability claim adjudicated. And I'm not here to blame you or anyone within Social Security. What I am here to say is this: we can't do this anymore. You cannot come and testify and not ring the bells if you're not getting the resources you need. We're now trying to play catch-up. We have a new president, a new Congress, and we're now trying to play catch-up after years of underfunding the work you need to do to give Americans who pay taxes their right to a decision, yea or nay, on whether they qualify for disability benefits, which they help make possible through their taxpayer dollars. You need to speak up. You can't allow the administration, and I know you're constrained because the White House, in years prior, Office of Management and Budget, which handles the budget that the President submits in years prior, has made it difficult for you to speak. I hope with this new administration, it'll be different. It'll be able to speak a lot louder, because you can't catch up in 1 year for years of neglect of this agency for services people are entitled to. You need to speak up. Secondly, never again should we allow a White House, any administration, or any Congress to tell seniors they've got to wait 2 to 4 years to have a disability claim adjudicated. Last year, actually 2 years ago, we finally got you more money than the President had requested in his budget for Social Security Administration. But that's after several years of the President not even seeking the money that you needed and you had told him you needed. So it's ridiculous for us to believe that this new President with a new Congress can undo years of neglect. But we've got to start. So when we come to you and say, by the way, you're going to do disability claims, you're going to adjudicate those, and on top of that, we're going to ask you to also administer the Medicare prescription drug program, we need to give you personnel, because you can't ask someone to be doing adjudication, then pulled off of that to go do Medicare prescription drug management of a program. When we say to you, you need to verify the work status of all people who want to work in this country to make sure that they are entitled to be in this country and work and go through the E-Verify system, and we ask you to handle some of that load, you got to come and say, well, then you got to give me some personnel and resources, because otherwise I'm pulling people away from disability claims for Americans who are waiting to hear whether they're going to get their assistance or not, to do the work of verifying individual status to work in this country, which we must do. But you got to shout and say, don't expect me to do all these things without getting the money. I think it's unfortunate that we have underfunded you $1,300,000,000 for the last, close to the last 10 years. It wasn't until, as I said, 2007 that you got in fiscal 2008, $150 million extra. But your staffing levels by the end of 2007 had dropped to levels not seen since 1972. And in that time, since 1972, the population you're dealing with has more than doubled. And so we've got to do something. You've got to be forceful. When we ask you a question, do you need resources, you got to give us a straight answer. And I know you're limited, but this is just not right. You've got people who are disabled who are waiting to hear on their claim, and it's frustrating because it's not your fault. It's not the good people who work for the Social Security Administration's fault. It's the fault of this Congress and the fault of previous administrations for not giving you the resources you needed. We shouldn't shortchange people because politically here in D.C., the tough decisions are not made. I consumed all of my time, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. I don't know if the Commissioner wanted to respond to anything, but it's just very frustrating because you can't just nod your head one way or the other if we ask you, do you need resources, and you know you're crying for more, and you say, we think we can make do, or we're going to try to do the best we can with what you give us. That's not good enough.
If I can just try to take a minute, Mr. Chairman, to respond to that. So I understand that you're trying to help me here. My view is I have spoken up loud and hard for this agency. I don't grandstand because...
So have you told us how much you need for this year?
Yes.
How much you need, not what you requested?
You're talking about FY10 or FY10? My request, I gave two, it gets complicated. I gave two requests. We did one in September, and I wanted to go in September so it would be bipartisan, so no one would say it's an Obama budget, it's a McCain budget. The world changed between September and January. I redid the budget. I asked for substantially more money on the basis of the economic consideration and submitted a second time. We've even informally tweaked it up a little bit since then. And you are right, I am constrained. I will say that we are very much in sync with this administration and what we think needs to be done in this agency. Good. This is a 10% increase in terms of what the President has recommended. And I remind you that when I got here, we had 15 straight years where the Congress was under the President's budget. When I started here, there was a furlough warning. There was a continuing resolution the whole year, and I spent an enormous amount of time groveling to get money from the pool for the emergency relief so I wouldn't have to furlough my people. That's the baseline where I started. 08 had already been submitted. I went back and got informal permission to go for $100 million more, and we ended up 148 more, and there was no veto threat on that 148. And I try not to grandstand and take credit, and a lot of people deserve credit for improving the situation in the agency. In FY 2009, we got a 6.5% increase at a time when the domestic agencies were almost all at zero or cut. And so we got a significant increase last year, and this year we're in sync at a 10% increase with this administration. So, I may not get up and yell at public events about these. I don't think that's effective
privately, then.
over the long.
Privately.
Well, I've been known to have a temper occasionally.
Just defend your people and your mission.
Well,
we want to be there for you.
And I agree with that, and I believe that I've tried to do that. And at some point, the question of your effort and your competency is the outcome. And I think we've had good outcomes the last 2 years. These are the 2 years that I've had to influence the budget.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Commissioner, I'm going to thank you for your time and your testimony and hope you'll be receptive if any of the members have a written follow-up.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being
here. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Our second panel, we have about an hour left in this room, and so I appreciate the panel. Commissioner, thank you. Appreciate the panel being so patient with us. If they would, please, we have the Honorable Patrick O'Carroll, who is the Inspector General, Social Security Administration. We have Mr. Dan Bertoni, the Director of Disability Issues, Government Accountability Office. Ms. Peggy Hathaway, on behalf of Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities Social Security Task Force. We have the Honorable Ron Bernoski, the Association of Administrative Law Judges from Milwaukee. Mr. James Fell, Federal Managers Association, Chapter 275, and Mr. Rick Warsinskey, the National Council of Social Security Management Associations, Incorporated from Cleveland. What the chair proposes to do is call on the panel in the order in which I've introduced them. For their statements. All of you will have any statement you wish to submit for the record included in its entirety without objection. And if I may ask, if you could hold your comments to 5 minutes, the panel would very much appreciate that. So with that, does Mr. Johnson, do you have an opening statement? With that, Mr. O'Carroll, welcome, and thank you for being here. You're recognized.
Good morning, Chairman Tanner. Good morning, Mr. Johnson. Let me first thank you for this invitation to testify today. It's a pleasure to be here in front of both subcommittees. With so many new members, I want to take just a moment to introduce SSA's Office of the Inspector General. We are 600 auditors, investigators, attorneys, and other professionals. Our mission is to prevent and detect fraud, waste, and abuse. In February, Chairman Tanner was gracious enough to meet with me to discuss issues of mutual concern. Mr. Chairman, you mentioned a constituent who contacted you wanting an assurance that disability benefits are paid only to those entitled to them, and that the stimulus funds provided to SSA are well spent and spent wisely. My testimony today is directed at that constituent, Mr. Chairman, and at the millions of others just like her. I'd also like to thank Congressman Brady. Last week, Mr. Brady was kind enough to visit one of our offices that best illustrates the partnership we have forged with SSA and with state and local agencies to combat fraud. Our Houston Cooperative Disability Investigative Unit, or CDI, is one of 20 such units around the country that we formed in partnership with SSA more than a decade ago. CDIs detect fraud at the initial application stage before any benefits are paid. With the return of $14 for every dollar invested, CDI units make sound fiscal sense. I thank Mr. Brady for his interest and his visit and extend to all of you the same invitation to visit any of our CDI units. We'll show you firsthand why there should be more. Both fraud and improper payments in the Title II and Title XVI disability programs are the focus of many of our concerns. Before I address the backlog, I'd like to briefly mention some of our work in this area. Recent and ongoing audits looking at improper payments resulting from unreported wages and assets, unreported changes in living arrangements, and recipients residing outside of the United States are representative of our integrity work in the SSI area. And audits like the current one, re-examining how well SSA reacts when earnings are reported on a disability beneficiary's account, are representative of our integrity work in the Title II program. Since our inception in 1995, we have worked to ensure that SSA strikes an appropriate balance between its world-class service and stewardship. For this reason, our work is not only integrity-based, but conducted with the full awareness that service is just as important. The disability backlog, which I testified twice last year about, is currently the IG's highest priority, just as it is SSA's. We recently published an audit examining the entire disability process from the claimant's perspective and found that while decisions on initial claims are made within 131 days and decisions made through reconsiderations take 279 days, requesting a hearing before an ALJ means on average a wait of over 800 days. These numbers make it clear that much more needs to be done. As a result, we are conducting multiple audits aimed at providing SSA and Congress with information and recommendations to reduce the disability backlog. For example, at a hearing last year, a subcommittee member raised valid concerns about the effect of these long waits on disabled claimants. We are now conducting an audit in which we're interviewing 550 disability applicants to learn about their experiences. Another current audit is examining the effects of states' decisions to furlough DDS employees. 5 states have already implemented such furloughs, creating further delays in the disability determination process. In other ongoing audits, we are looking at optimum staffing ratios and skill sets in hearing offices, SSA's e-pulling pilot, reasons why 4 particular types of disabilities create a disproportionate number of ALJ reversals, and the effectiveness of video hearings on productivity. Also, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act provided SSA with $500 million to process disability and retirement workloads. As soon as SSA presents its plan for its use of these funds, my office will begin a series of audits to assess that plan. Mr. Chairman, you can tell your constituent we'll be very thorough. I thank you again for this invitation to testify today, and I'll be happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you very much for your timely opening statement. Mr. Bertoni, we're pleased to recognize you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, good morning. I'm pleased to be here to discuss challenges facing SSA with respect to disability workloads and field office customer service. SSA provides services that touch many lives, including millions who apply for disability benefits each year, and those seeking retirement benefits, and a host of other critical services. For years, the agency has faced difficulties managing disability workloads and making timely decisions. In fact, over the last decade, the disability backlog grew to over 500,000 claims, and many claimants are waiting years for a final decision. In other mission-critical areas, SSA has also experienced service declines, with millions of customers waiting longer to be served and millions more having their phone calls go unanswered. My testimony today is based on our prior work and focuses on 2 areas. factors contributing to SSA's service delivery challenges, and actions the agency has taken to better serve those who apply for disability benefits and other services. In summary, two key drivers have contributed to disability backlogs and other service delivery challenges: rising numbers of claims and staffing shortfalls. By the start of fiscal year 2007, backlog claims reached 576,000, a growth rate of 120% over 1997 levels. And over the years, spikes in benefit applications due to economic downturns, aging baby boomers, referrals from other benefit programs, changes to program eligibility requirements, and increased outreach have contributed to the backlog of claims. While backlogs have occurred at all stages of the process, they were most concentrated at the hearings level for 7 of the 10 years that we reviewed. In concert with the growth in pending claims, processing times at most levels also increased, and for claims that were appealed, 30% took between 600 and 1,000 days to process. The rise in disability backlogs has coincided with high rates of turnover and attrition of experienced disability examiners, as well as shortfalls in the number of administrative law judges and hearing office support staff, such as decision writers, attorneys, claims technicians, and others that prepare cases for review. Beyond the challenges associated with disability claims, SSA field offices face similar pressures, driven in part by increasing workloads. Last year, we reported that field office waiting times increased by 40%, and that 3 million customers waited more than 1 hour to be served. Moreover, 51% of those calling SSA's field offices had at least one earlier call that had gone unanswered. Over the years, SSA has undertaken several initiatives to improve the disability process and address other challenges. Unfortunately, as we have noted in several prior reports dating back more than a decade, some initiatives have faltered for a variety of reasons, including poor planning and execution. Others improved the process but were too costly and subsequently abandoned. In 2006, SSA introduced a new set of comprehensive reforms to improve the accuracy, consistency, and timeliness of the claims process, called the Disability Service Improvement Initiative, or DSI. However, this also yielded mixed results due to rushed implementation, poor communication, and higher than anticipated costs, and many aspects were ultimately suspended. In light of the considerable investment in DSI, we recommended that SSA conduct a thorough evaluation to determine what, if any, aspects should be continued. We also recommended that going forward, SSA should develop a systematic planning, risk analysis, and evaluation framework to increase the likelihood that future initiatives will succeed. In 2007, SSA outlined its current plan, which focuses on breaking the hearings level backlog. Key initiatives include updating SSA's medical criteria, expediting cases for which approval is likely, and improving hearings office capacity through hiring and other means. SSA has also received $500 million in stimulus funds to assist with processing key workloads. We currently have work underway assessing the plan's potential to eliminate the hearings backlog by 2013 as targeted. To address field office customer service challenges, the agency is redistributing work to offices with capacity, using managers to perform work typically conducted by lower-graded staff, and deferring some program integrity workloads, such as continuing eligibility reviews. Unfortunately, this can result in some beneficiaries receiving payments who are no longer eligible. At present, it is unclear how SSA will meet future service delivery demands, given its current organizational configuration and business processes. The volume of work conducted at SSA's field offices has increased markedly over time, while staff turnover and losses persist. Moreover, projected staff retirements over the next several years will further tax the agency, and we have recommended that SSA develop a comprehensive service delivery plan to better position itself to serve changing customer demographics and service needs. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement. I'm happy to answer any questions you or others may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bertoni. Ms. Hathaway, we're pleased to recognize you.
Thank you for inviting me here to testify today on behalf of the Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities, sort of the voice of the consumer in this debate, this discussion. Social Security Title II and SSI benefits, as well as the accompanying Medicare and Medicaid coverage, are the means of survival for millions of people with severe disabilities. They rely on SSA to promptly and fairly decide on their claims for disability benefits. Your constituent services staff has likely reported the heartbreaking stories and consequences of intolerable delays in the backlogs. When a decision is appealed, people often wait years for a hearing, longer for a decision, and even longer for actual payment of benefits. And as others have pointed out, that's even after they've gone through the several-month-long initial procedure. Behind the statistics, people's lives are unraveling. Families are torn apart. Homes are lost. Medical conditions deteriorate. Financial security crumbles. And many individuals die before a decision is made. This month, the National Organization of Social Security Claimants Representatives, a CCD member, conducted a quick survey of its members to update how the backlogs are affecting claimants. Our written statement includes stories from a number of states. I just want to summarize a few of them briefly here for you. Miss A from Tennessee filed her application for benefits in 2007. She was forced to file for bankruptcy and lives on very, very little income. No hearing has been scheduled, and there's been no response to her request for an on-the-record decision. Mr. D from Georgia has terminal hepatitis C and depends on his girlfriend for all of his support. After his March 07 initial claim was denied, he filed for a hearing in October 07 and a request for an on-the-record decision as a terminal case. A year and a half later, there is no hearing scheduled and no decision. Mr. A from Texas filed his application in September 03, was denied, and requested a hearing in February 04. After several additional procedural steps, no decision has been issued 5.5 years after the initial claim. In the meantime, Mr. A's house burned down and he had to file for bankruptcy. Mr. L from Oklahoma, I'm sorry to report, committed suicide when his case was denied at consideration in May of 08. His widow is awaiting for the yet-to-be-scheduled hearing. Ms. S from South Carolina illustrates the importance of this determination for health coverage. She had no health coverage and no Medicaid because SSA had not yet found her disabled. After unhealing sores from diabetes went untreated, she died from complications of diabetes. At a posthumous hearing, the ALJ stated it was obvious that Mrs. S had been disabled and issued a fully favorable decision. The medical care and Medicaid coverage that Ms. S did not receive due to the hearing delay most likely would have saved her life. Then there's Mr. H from Iowa, who has multiple sclerosis and has had a claim pending since September of 07. He sent a letter to his attorney, part of which I'd like to read to you because it is so touching. He says, I'm writing this brief letter to tell you about what this disease has caused. Besides the day-to-day struggle just to live, it has caused my wife and me, along with our 2 children, financial ruin. My mortgage payment is as much as my wife makes. I receive no other income and worry day to day how to exist. As bad as this may sound, I've actually tried to end this with a suicide attempt in November of 08. There isn't any way to describe this except to say it feels hopeless. The primary reason for the increasing backlogs and reductions in other key services is that, as you have heard, until quite recently, SSA has been persistently underfunded over many years. For years, the commissioner's budget came in at X dollars, the president's budget came in below that, and Congress appropriated even less than the president's budget until that was fiscal year 2008. So on top of the retirement and disability applications from baby boomers, along comes the economic crisis with a huge unexpected surge in both retirement and disability applications. We are encouraged by and grateful for Congress's appropriating recent funds for SSA in the economic stimulus bill, in the 09 appropriation, and in the President's 2010 budget, including funds for program integrity. We also appreciate Commissioner Astrue's commitment to what he rightly calls the moral imperative to reduce the disability backlog. SSA must also find ways to operate more efficiently. Our written testimony has a number of recommendations. A note of caution, SSA must take care to determine how new initiatives will affect the very people for whom the system exists, people who meet the strict criteria for disability. These people face a host of personal, family, and financial circumstances that make it difficult or impossible to navigate the complex disability determination system without substantial assistance. SSA must continue to ensure that each individual's claim is fully developed before a decision is made. To prevent tragedies similar to those that I have described, CCD urges Congress to continuously provide SSA the resources necessary to carry out its mandated responsibility and substantially improve its service to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hathaway. Your testimony reminds me of what I said at the beginning, that they're real people, just not numbers. And so thank you for being here. Next is the Honorable Ron Bernoski. Mr. Bernoski, and well, we'll go to Mr. Fell then. Mr. Fell, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Tanner, Chairman McDermott, Ranking Members Johnson and Lindner. My name is Jim Fell, and I'm here today. Representing managers in the Social Security Administration's Office of Disability Adjudication and Review in my current role as immediate past president of the Federal Managers Association, Chapter 275. Currently, I serve as a hearing office director in Cincinnati, Ohio ODAR office, and recently accomplished 38 years of federal service, 35 with SSA. Please keep in mind that I'm here on my own time and my own volition, representing the reviews of FMA, and I do not speak for SSA. Within ODAR, there are over 765,000 pending requests for hearing, an increase of almost 5,000 cases since the beginning of the fiscal year. Much of the increase in cases this year can be attributed to the current economic slowdown. It now takes an average of 499 days to process a request for hearing. As managers within ODAR, we're acutely aware of the impact this backlog has had on our ability to deliver the level of service the American public deserves. I appeared before the subcommittee just 2 years ago, and I'm here once again to reconfirm that the backlog of cases is a result of the ongoing lack of adequate staffing levels and resources. The underfunding of the agency by Congress over the last decade has worsened the situation. Several years of untimely budgets further compound the problem. If these delays and inadequacies continue, clearing the disability case backlog will be impossible. We at FMA appreciate the attention the subcommittees and Commissioner Astrue are placing on addressing remedies to the problem. In my written testimony, I discussed the Commissioner's four-pronged approach to eliminating the backlog. As mentioned, there are over 765,000 cases pending. In February, administrative law judges averaged 2.2 dispositions per day. With 250 work days in a year and 1,142 judges in SSA, ODAR could reasonably dispose of 628,000 cases in a year. This is not an unrealistic figure. However, it only allows us to work on the incoming cases, but it has little impact on the backlog. It is clear that ALJs will not meet this level if they do not have the staff to prepare the cases and write the decisions. Another troubling problem is the vast imbalances from region to region. Average pending cases per ALJ range from a low of 477 in Dallas region to a high of 903 in Seattle. 5 regions average over 700 pending cases per ALJ. Individual offices range from a low of 288 pending cases to a high of 1,442, and 9 offices exceed 1,000 cases per ALJ. It is our experience that distribution of judges and staff is often based on physical space and not an office's caseload. We must find an efficient way to better balance and redistribute the work if we're serious about tackling the backlog. Ultimately, this is a numbers game. None of the Commissioner's initiative, whether alone or combined, is a silver bullet that will eliminate the backlog. We either have to slow the cases coming from the front end, which would require significant legislative changes, or we have to increase the capacity at the back end. The challenge is yours. To enable SSA to meet its goals, Congress must approve a sufficient level of funding. In the decade prior to FY08, Congress appropriated far less than the President requested each year. Without a doubt, this has had a devastating effect on the services provided to the American public. Recognizing the needs of SSA, Congress appropriated $126 million above the President's FY09 request. Unfortunately, we operated under a continuing resolutions for the first 6 months of the year, and as a result, ODAR endured hiring, budget, and overtime limitations. Continuing resolutions have become the norm rather than the exception, and it is significantly hindering our ability to get the job done. In order for funds To be properly spent, budgets must be implemented by October 1st. Not doing so ties the hands of already beleaguered organization. To remedy the backlog situation, Congress should at a minimum pass President Obama's 2010 budget request of $11.6 billion before the start of the fiscal year. This is a 10% increase over the current fiscal year. We applaud the President for his commitment to eliminating the backlog problem and urge Congress to appropriate his request. I would like to close my statement with a personal story. In my office, about 5 feet from where I sit, I have a dedicated fax machine, which I call the Congressional Fax. It's basically dedicated to the congressional staff, your staffs, for your constituents. Every day I receive inquiries, most of which are critical in nature and dire in need. I review heart-wrenching letters about homes being lost, crucial medications being skipped because they can't be afforded, college funds which are depleted, and overall despair. They do not understand why it takes years to receive a hearing. With your help, I'd like to have no further use for this fax machine. Thank you for your time and consideration of our views, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Feld. Judge Bernoski, you're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for inviting us to testify here today. As administrative law judges, we are keenly aware of the disability case backlog because we work with it on a daily basis. Administrative law judges continue to work hard at Social Security. During the past decade, we have been rendering case dispositions on a record basis. In 2008, we issued dispositions in about 550,000 cases, which amounts to over 2 cases per day per judge. The only agency study that we know of regarding ALJ production was part of a 1994 agency reform plan. This study concluded that a judge could efficiently produce about 25 to 55 cases a month. This would have the judge devoting between 3 to 7 hours to each case on an incremental basis. We don't believe that this is too much time for a case that is worth around $250,000, including Medicare. We have prepared a chart, which is part of our statement, which shows that our judges are rendering case dispositions in a bell curve manner, which with most of the judges, of course, being in the center of the chart. A second chart also shows that the more cases that a judge issues, the higher the pay rates become. Now, these charts were based on information provided to a newspaper by the agency. This continued increase in case production has come in spite of the fact that the electronic files have slowed our work process, and e-polling is showing signs of failure. E-polling is an electronic system to prepare our exhibit files for hearings, and it eliminates the need for the manual process. The failure of this system proves our past comments to this committee that Social Security has a history of overselling benefits of technology. For example, last year the agency claimed that e-polling reduced the need for the 5-to-1 support staff ratio for judges. Instead, this failure now shows that we will continue to require this support staff ratio. In fact, at the last hearing before this committee last year, evidence was introduced to support a 6-to-1 staff ratio for judges. The GAO and the IG have both concluded that judges would decide more cases if the files were available for hearing. Despite this hard work by our judges and other employees of the agency, we continue to fall behind and the case backlog continues to grow. And if history remains consistent, the current economic recession will add to our backlog. The agency is in need of additional resources to address this problem. The resources are needed, as has been indicated, to hire additional administrative law judges and support staff. Social Security hearings are based on an inquisitorial rather than an adversarial adversarial model. The judge is responsible for ensuring that the hearing record is complete and that both the claimant and the trust fund receive a fair hearing. This places more responsibility on the judge, and the assistance of staff is necessary to allow judges to complete their work. We work as a team with our staff, and the support staff is needed to set up the file, send the notice of hearing, assist during the hearing, monitor post-hearing development, and prepare draft hearing decisions. Now, in this time of tight budgets, additional support staff could be obtained by closing the ODR regional offices and assigning those workers to hearing offices to support the hearing process. However, Mr. Chairman, money alone is not enough, and substantive reform is also needed to improve the process. Cases that meet the standard for disability must be taken out of the system before they meet the administrative law judge hearing, before they get to that level. This change can be done by adopting a system like the federal that was in the DSI program, or by using our attorneys to achieve this result. Vocational rules could also be revised to reflect our increased longevity and our changing workplace. The initiatives that the Commissioner has implemented have had little impact on reducing the disability case backlog. Ideas such as the streamlined files, the National Hearing Center, centralized printing and mailing, and the electronic filing system have done little, and in many cases have added to our workload and have increased the backlog. Now, we have prepared a white paper with our recommendations for addressing the Social Security disability program, and we would offer into the record with the chairman's consent. And
without objection.
Thank you very much, and that concludes my statement.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Warsinskey.
Chairman Tanner and McDermott, Congressman Johnson and Linder. My name is Rick Warsinskey, and I represent the National Council of Social Security Management Associations. Our association represents the field office and teleservice management from over 1,300 offices nationwide. The field offices are your local Social Security offices that handle walk-in Social Security business, such as applications for benefits and replacement Social Security cards. The teleservice centers are where the 57,000,1-800-772-1213 calls to SSA are answered throughout the nation. We are the frontline representatives of the agency. I also help coordinate the activities of the SSA Advocacy Group, and I have been a manager of the Social Security office in downtown Cleveland for 14 years. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to be here today. We are very appreciative of the fact that Congress appropriated $126.5 million more for SSA in fiscal year 2009 than the President recommended. We are also very appreciative of the funding included for SSA in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And finally, we are pleased to see the President recommended a funding level of $11.6 billion for SSA's administrative funding for fiscal year 2010. All of this is a lot of money, but these funding levels are absolutely necessary to address the severe challenges facing SSA that are growing with a deepening recession. Let me outline several of the key challenges SSA faces. 1, SSA's hearing backlog is at a near record level of 765,000 hearings, up from about 300,000 earlier this decade. Hearing processing times have stayed in the 500-day range. 2, the number of hearings received this fiscal year has increased by about 10%. These hearings are related to claims filed before the recession started. 3, the number of new initial disability claims is increasing on a weekly basis and is up nearly 14% this calendar year. 4, retirement claims being filed are up 28% from 2 years ago. 5, the number of customers walking into field offices continues to grow and is at record levels, even though Internet claims filed have doubled this year. Waiting times are up 61% since 2002, and nearly 80,000 people are leaving our offices without service every week this year due to the long waits. 6. The field office telephone service is deplorable. I repeat, deplorable. Nearly 50% of the over 54 million business-related callers who try to contact Social Security offices receive a busy signal. 7. Field offices and teleservice centers are struggling to provide training to their staff to keep them updated because the staff needs to be moving workloads. 8. SSA is facing a major retirement wave over the next few years. And finally, 9. There's a backlog of 1.4 million CDRs and 700,000 fewer SSI redeterminations are being done this year than earlier this decade. This is costing taxpayers over $10 billion. Ideally, it would be wonderful if we could address all these challenges in 1 year. The reality is that the challenges SSA faces cannot be fixed with 1 year's funding, especially as a recession is adding so much more work to SSA. Hard decisions will need to be made where to direct agency resources, as there is both a strong need to address the growing workloads and backlogs and to address workloads such as CDRs and SSI redeterminations. But the funding we receive this year and hopefully next year will be a major boost to addressing our backlogs and providing improved service. We ask for your continued support for adequate funding for SSA. We also ask that you take a hard look at legislative changes that would reduce our administrative cost and improve program fairness. These are outlined in our written statement. We believe that the American public demands and deserves to receive good and timely service for the tax dollars they have paid to Social Security. We also believe the stewardship of the public's hard-earned tax dollars needs to be at the highest level. I thank you for this opportunity to appear today and would welcome any questions you may have.
Well, let me, on behalf of the members, thank all of you for your time and your attention to this matter. Let me assure you that your testimony will be gone over by the members and our staff in great detail, because this committee intends to be very active this year. We may be asking you to come back in 6 months as we monitor what's happening. This, as I said at the outset, is a national problem that has dire consequences for real people. And your devotion to this cause is admirable, and the committee wants to thank you. Judge, you said something that struck me. I asked the commissioner when he was here if the error rate on electronic filing they had any data to support what I have to believe would be a higher error rate than if one who is making application can sit down and talk with a human being who's knowledgeable in these matters about it. His response was, if you were here, that they thought the error rate was about the same. My thought, if that's true, then maybe I don't have a concern, but if it's not true, it seems to me that that is in itself clogging the system with inaccurate or erroneous applications that have to be pitched out before one can get to the merits of the case. Do you have a comment on that, sir?
As far as the errors in the application and errors of the type that the commissioner referred to, by the time that claim gets to the administrative law judge level, we're at the end of the food chain. Those types of corrections have invariably been made in the file, so we're not being burdened with that type of problem. But the electronic file does slow down the process as far as we're concerned in the way we handle the file. It takes longer to open up an electronic file than it does a paper file. It takes longer for the case to boot up and come into the screen. Takes longer to turn a page electronically than it does to turn a page in a file. Also, it's more difficult to read electronic file. If you're going to sit, if a judge is sitting there or a clerk, any type of person sits there and reads from a screen all day long, that has an impact on your eyes, it has an impact on the back of your neck. All of these problems have impacted on us, and in fact has slowed down our ability to handle those files. Also, sometimes the system just breaks down because there's so much traffic on the network that it can't handle it, or it slows down considerably. All of these things have impacted us. Now this e-polling is another problem that's going to have a dramatic effect on us, because that was a system that was implemented to pull the duplicates out of the file. Before, we had to do that manually when you had paper files. Clerical people had to go through and set up the case, remove the duplicates, because we have an inquisitorial system. We get the evidence rather than the attorneys bringing them in. Well, now electronically, if that system fails, and we have to, in fact, kind of do it manually with electronic system, it takes a much longer period of time. And it takes about, I spoke with some of our people in our office before I left on Friday, because I thought we'd be talking about that today, and they said it takes about twice as long now with the electronic system as it did manually with its, with the broken process.
Thank you, Mr. Warsinskey. You have a comment?
I think the part of your question was directed at the internet claims, which the commissioner was referring to, and he said that the quality on the internet claims, when he called them electronic claims, but they're really internet, because that was the study I think he was referring to, was a little bit better than a claim that's filed in the office. And the study that they did have did show that the internet claims are usually a little cleaner than the average case that we get in an office right now. But the reason why the accuracy is good is because we review the cases before they're, and very thoroughly, the claims representative review them before they're actually paid out or adjudicated. So that's why we have the good quality. No internet claim would go through. We don't have any claims that are going through in the internet right now without some kind of review to make sure it's paid correctly.
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one or two questions. Mr. O'Carroll, how much of the work at local offices and hearing offices is completed using the Social Security computer system that he says doesn't work?
Mr. Johnson, on that, the vast majority of all the work in the SSA offices is done on computer. I got to say, as I was listening to the other panel members on it, we are proponents of electronic service. We do believe that using the internet, using technology for applications is a wise use of technology on it. We are monitoring it all the time in terms of seeing the accuracy rate. We're finding it is very accurate, mostly because it is reviewed. But in a lot of cases, when a person's sitting down and filling out a form, they're putting a lot of thought into it. Usually, in many cases, not in an office on it. They think, they put down their application logically, and we find that that works quite well. Give you an example of one of the things is when somebody's applying for a Social Security card. Years ago, what they would do is they would sit down with the claims rep with the paper form and go through it. The SS5 would be taken, then it would be transcribed onto electronic record. Now with the electronic SS5 assistant, it's being done, each step is monitored, and then they ask for the piece of identification, whatever on it, and it's making the application process for an SS card much more accurate, and and we applaud the system. So,
well, the system is, I mean, you got old technology in that computer system. Is that causing a problem, and does it ever go down?
Well, to a degree, yes, and that is one of the needs for modernizing the system on it. But a lot of the front end stuff, as an example, this assistant type of thing isn't being done using the mainframe. It's being done using a server, and then that data is put into the mainframe, which it's kind of stepped down into the old technology, which is one of the biggest problems. Is the front end is being using more of the modern technology, and then the old COBOL planned type of data at the NCC is not necessarily slowing it down, but it's part of the problem. And if it was updated, it'd be much more streamlined and quicker.
How about telling me what would happen, in your opinion, if there were a failure in the system?
I'll tell you, Congressman, that's something that's a great concern to us. We've been looking at it a lot. We're very concerned, and I think it came up as to one of the questions earlier in the hearing is that how come in just recent times this degradation of the system has been identified, and it's quite significant. What our concerns on it is that if it does go down, it's going to take so long to bring back up again. Yes, the records are kept. Yes, they're on tapes. They're in other locations. But it's going to be such a process. And I think, as the Commissioner mentioned, if the tapes are brought up to New Jersey, which would be the offsite at the moment for it, it takes about a week to 2 weeks just to bring in all the equipment, get it loaded, to get it going. And as everybody knows, and one of the reasons we're concerned here is that the daily process of SSA, which affects all of America, would be basically put into suspension for a period of a couple weeks. And then when you're thinking about all these massive claims and everything else, until that system's up, they'll be taken on paper form, and then all those papers have to be updated. So I do say that, having redundancy, coming up with a second site that's identical to the Baltimore site, is really going to be necessary for all of us to be able to sleep better.
So if it went down at the end of the month, people wouldn't get their checks. Is that true?
No, sir. They would get checks, because we've looked into that, because what they'll do is they'd use the old file. So a lot of people, maybe some deceased people, would be getting checks. Maybe some people that needed a check didn't, but the vast majority would get the record of the month before from the Treasury Department, and the checks would go out.
So
but then,
Treasury
as you know,
has
a lot of money be out of the barn.
Treasury has a second record. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Dr. McDermott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know who to ask, whether it's Mr. Fell or Dr. Bernoski or Judge Bernoski or whatever. I'm reading these cases that Ms. Hathaway brought in here, and I think that if you put 2 or 3 or 4 reasonable people around the table reading the cases, even these one-paragraph synopses that are given to us, in almost every case we would say this person's eligible for disability benefits. So when you tell me that there are 999 cases pending in Seattle for an average of 500 days, I ask myself, why is that happening? Explain to me. I mean, I was a witness, so I've been in your courts in the administrative law procedure on various cases, and what I don't understand is, are they held up because it's little pieces of paper that aren't there, and therefore we don't go ahead with them, and we put them off another month? Is that what happens? Or is it that these are such difficult decisions? I mean, if you read the case of Mrs. T was waiting 29 months for her hearing. She had been diagnosed with borderline intellectual functioning and epilepsy. While she was waiting for her hearing, she exhausted her time limit on TANF benefits and lost her income. Her mother used her income tax refund to prevent foreclosure on the house. It doesn't sound to me like there's any doubt that that woman is ultimately going to be judged disabled and eligible for benefits. So what is the hang-up in this system?
I'd like to take, well, the first part of it, probably Judge Bernoski on the actual thing on the disability part. But on some of the holdup, and especially, a lot of it is demographic as far as why, for instance, the Chicago region is so inundated, where maybe the Philadelphia region and the California region or San Francisco region are not. The Seattle region is heavily inundated. Part of the problem is getting to the files. We do have a process where claims are looked at when they come in. And if a flag goes up, they're given to attorneys to look at to see if there's a possibility of an on-the-record decision, to see if they can look at it. Maybe it only needs one more piece of evidence. But what happens on a lot of these, I mentioned there are over 765,000 requests. Of those requests, over 400,000 are waiting for preparations for the judges to see them. And that when Judge Bernoski talked about the length of time it takes to prepare these for the judge, that could be 4 to 6 hours depending on the size of the case. That's where the huge backlog right now is. If they're not caught at first through this screening process, where we'll often look at cases where people are 50 or over, then when they're finally discovered is at the point that the file is prepared, or through the fax machine in offices where we do get something from a congressional liaison saying, wait a minute, this person has got a problem, here's some updated medical. So there are a number of things that can happen to, we do have things in process to keep it from going that far, but there are so many cases in the system, if one gets through, they're not going to be discovered until they get to the point of preparation. Now, as far as the issue on the type of disability and should that be approved, I'm going to turn that over to Judge Bernoski, the actual medical part.
I mean, we have a thing on welfare claims, on Medicaid claims, that if they don't, happen in a certain number of days, they get paid anyway, and they get money on top of it. The doctors get additional money in interest because it hasn't been paid, right? What's the problem with just letting these cases through and reviewing them, and then if there's one, you can call them back? Is it that you can't reclaim the money? Is that the problem? I mean, I don't understand, because somebody set up this Rube Goldberg system to keep from paying benefits. There's no question, looking at it, coming in here again and again, we hear the same thing we heard last year. So why doesn't the system let them through?
Well, I guess one of the reasons we don't have the system that you described is that that's not part of the regulation or the law, so we couldn't do it, at least now. But the fundamental problem is that our system is overloaded at this point. We just have more work than we can possibly handle. That's what we need: more judges, we need more staff, we need more money, as has been said repeatedly during the course of this hearing. Also, this is what we suggested in the course of our testimony, is that it would be helpful if we would have a mechanism in the system to look at the case more formally before it gets to the administrative law judge hearing. The federal concept that was part of DSI, where before the case would come to the administrative law judge, a person would have a function within the process that would look at that case and review it and determine whether it could be paid on a record. Maybe a little bit of additional evidence would be needed to pay that case, but to pull all of these cases out of the system early as possible and not allow them to move and progress till they get to the administrative law judges. We are doing it the slowest and most expensive way, because we are hearing all of these cases at the back end of the process, as Mr. Lewis said, at the back end of the process, with the employees that are making the most money. Administrative law judges are probably one of the highest paid people in the system, and so that's the type of system that we have put together, where we're hearing the cases later by the more highly skilled and more highly paid people, where we suggest there should be something earlier in the process to pull some of these cases out. That would help. That would help, we believe.
So you're saying it needs a total rewrite of the regulations of how the system works? The system is dysfunctional.
It doesn't take a total rewrite of the regulations. We could do a federal system like we have now, or we could build on what we have. We have staff attorneys and attorneys in the program right now where we could just expand on what we've got and give them that additional function where they would be doing this work earlier in the process. We have a senior attorney program now which does some of that work, but the problem with the senior attorney program that we have is that they look at the case and they either award it or it goes forward. The type of of benefit from their expertise to help develop the case is not done. So the skill that they have and the knowledge that they have acquired and the analysis that they have put into that case is not documented to be passed on to the administrative law judge to help shorten the administrative law judge's analysis. In fact, we're doing it twice under this current system. I don't know.
Thank you, Mr.
Dr. Linder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General O'Carroll, you mentioned in your testimony that they're moving to, excuse me, water. I'm sorry. You said the wall units would cost about $24,000 each, and the video conferencing on the desktop video units would be about $8,000 each?
Yes, Mr. Linder. We're doing an audit right now on taking a look at the effectiveness of it, whether the investment in putting into all the video units is worth it. So it's an ongoing one now. But yes, it is expensive, and we're monitoring the cost.
A quick check of the internet finds that a nationwide company offers video conferencing cameras that start at $9.99, along with a free video conference calling to other network users. What do you think of that, Mr. Bertoni?
I'm not aware of that particular instance, but I guess your point is that to the extent that if they can find cheaper and as useful tools to get this job done, I think that should be the case. And I think, there's examples in this agency and others where through the procurement and contracting functions, that hasn't always been the case. But I would, in hearing that, I would say if there's technology that's similar, do the same job, and it's cheaper, that should be looked at closely.
The last laptop I bought, it came with the laptop at no additional cost. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Can I make one comment on
Sure.
that, please, if I could? I'm actively involved in that. I have a number of video units in my office. We're installing a video spoke in Indianapolis, plus I'm putting a desktop video in Madison, Indiana shortly. What we have closed net IP. We have security issues, privacy issues. Also, with the administrative law judge, the clarity of this system has to be as close as it can to an in-person hearing. So before we go on the cheap to put more in, we'd really have to make sure that this type of technology we can use. The technology we have now on some of the 58-inch flat screens we're getting in is extremely clear. The desktop videos, true, they're expensive, but the clarity is amazing. My chief judge has one in his office. He holds remote hearings with it, and he's very impressed with the clarity of it. So I don't think we want to sacrifice the clarity and the ability of the judge to do the view, what he needs, and also the privacy and making sure we have a closed net system. It would have to be, I think, very careful analysis before we went out and tried to contract outside. That would be my opinion.
I think if you looked closely, you'd find you can buy these things pretty secure and very large for a whole lot less than $24,000. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Your timing is impeccable. We have 3 votes, and we were supposed to be out of the room at 1:30. May I again thank all of you very much. Your testimony will be carefully read, and if we have follow-up, I assume we may contact you with respect to any question we may have about your testimony. Thank you, Ms. Hathaway. Thank you all for being here. Meeting is adjourned.
It was nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you, too.